The van came down the street at 8 kilometers an hour with its back door already open, which is not a speed a van does anything at. I was under a tree at the time. Overcoat, scarf, a hat with a brim you could land an aircraft on, and I had put the trunk between myself and the road on purpose, which is going to matter in about 9 seconds. Then somebody took 2 handfuls of that overcoat from behind and put me through the open door and climbed in after me, and it shut. Right. You are going to need some things, and I am going to give them to you at speed because we are already moving. My name is Li Wei. I am 18 years old, and this is my second life. In the first one, I was a spirit medium, which is an old and entirely respectable profession consisting of finding the dead and asking them politely to come and work for you. Then I woke up in the body of an errand boy for the largest criminal organization in this country, in a city where nobody stays dead in a way I can use, and I have spent 18 months correcting that. I have 6 of them now. Each one woke up with exactly one ability, and none of the abilities were my choice. One can force a person to confess how they feel, out loud, to somebody they had not planned on telling. One breathes underwater and can lend it out. One reenacts his own death on request, which is precisely as useful as it sounds. One buys me a single second in which nothing in the world can touch me. And 2 of them are a small round married couple who move at the speed of weather and are, for reasons I have never established, fireproof. They eat one thing. They eat Killing Intent, which is the film that builds up on a person who has decided to end somebody and which comes off cleanly at exactly one moment. And that moment is when its owner gives up. Which is why I became a detective. A detective is the address the dead get delivered to, and it is why I was standing under a tree at 20 past 11 on a Tuesday morning, dressed like a man avoiding a photograph, waiting for a black Porsche. The organization calls me Absinthe. I have had the name 4 months. It is a Greek aniseed spirit, and when you add water to it, it turns white, and I have decided not to examine that. I was dressed that way because the man in the Porsche has silver hair down to his waist, and my neighbor is a 7-year-old detective with an eidetic memory, and the 2 of them meeting is a conversation I intend to postpone for as long as physically possible. And I had gone to that meeting rather than to a concert with a friend, in spite of a genuinely good offer of tickets, because a fortnight earlier, a 2-line item on an entertainment page had told me that the organization's most dangerous operative had announced her retirement from acting, which meant she was coming home. And whatever she has, I want it. 3 streets away, meanwhile, a man with a pair of binoculars had been looking for somebody else entirely. His name was Tanaka Hiroshi. He was a career robber. On New Year's Eve, he had been at Shuenji Temple silencing his own accomplices, and the duo had happened to be passing and had heard something they did not understand, and had built it into the lyrics of a new song without any idea what they were describing. Then, weeks later, he had been listening to the radio out of boredom and had heard the demo tape, so he decided to remove the singer and the tape together. He had 2 men. He sent one of them ahead on foot and got out himself to keep watch from a safe distance because street kidnapping is dangerous and delegation is a management skill. The one left in the van picked up the binoculars his boss had dropped and swept the road and found a man of the right build standing under a tree, heavily wrapped, concealed, using the trunk to hide himself from passers-by. Obviously the singer, obviously avoiding fans. He pointed the target out to the 3rd man and got out of the vehicle. I felt the Killing Intent coming about 11 seconds before it arrived. Thin and mediocre in quality. But I still looked up out of professional curiosity, and there was a van creeping along the far curb at about 8 kilometers an hour, with its rear door not fully shut, and behind me, coming around in a wide arc, a second one. I want to record my actual thought in full. Well, aren't I lucky? I did not turn around. I let my eyes drift across the road as though resting them, and then went back to my phone. At 11:28, Stout pulled up at the meeting point and started looking for me. He heard an engine, turned his head, and saw a van come off the road and go straight for a tree where 2 men were standing, one of whom shoved the other one in and then climbed in himself. The door shut. The van, with its windows blacked out, accelerated away. Stout wound his window down and leaned on the sill. Ha! A snatch. I thought they were going to run somebody over. He fully expected his brother to make a remark about the police. Instead, Rum glanced at him and said, in a completely flat voice, "Are you enjoying it?" Stout stopped smiling at once. "No, I was just..." Rum looked down the road where the van had gone. "Follow them," and took out his pistol and racked it. "Aren't we waiting for Absinthe?" Somebody moved in the back seat. Champagne leaned forward with her elbow on the seat back. Green eyes, narrowed, watching the far end of the street. "Absinthe's in that van. I've seen his interviews. He has a memorable face." I did not hear any of that. I was in the back of a van with a man's knee in my ribs, working out how long I had. There was something in the way she said it that suggested she was rather looking forward to the outcome. Stout took a moment to connect car with the vehicle that had just committed a kidnapping in front of him. His first conclusion was that Absinthe had branched out from murder into abduction. His second was that this is exactly the sort of thing that happens when the young will not listen. He had been told to keep a clean detective's profile. Now he was breaking the law in the street in the middle of the day. Stout hates a subordinate who cannot be managed. It was only after they had gone half a block that Stout understood, from the tone of the other two, that something was wrong with his model. Wait, was Absinthe the one who got pushed in? He sat with that for a while, and then had a bold and hopeful idea, which was that possibly the kidnappers were professionals and would silence the witness and remove an unstable element from his life. Then his reason spoke up and said that Absinthe does not get taken off the street by strangers, and that this was probably a scheme. In the van, the boss got back in at a corner and took his sunglasses off and glanced into the load space. There was a stranger lying on the floor, and his second man was going through his pockets. He nodded, satisfied, and said, "Give me the bag." He needed to check for the tape. The bag came forward. He unzipped it and went through it, and there was no tape. And it was at that point that he noticed the bag was the wrong style entirely from the one the singer had been carrying. He looked at it for several seconds while a very bad feeling arrived. Then he switched on the interior light and turned around toward the load space. Before his eyes adjusted, he heard a soft, heavy sound. Then he could see, and what he could see was his second man on the floor, with his eyes rolled back, and the hostage, who ought to have been tied like a parcel and waiting to die, sitting up holding that man's pistol, examining it with interest. The muzzle came up and pointed at the front seats. "Yamahiro-cho," I said, "or I'll kill you." Tanaka Hiroshi said. Then his expression settled because he had reached a conclusion. A young man kidnapped by mistake, some kind of fighting background, got lucky with a subordinate, and now, in the arrogance of youth, believes that possession of a firearm has reversed the situation. He has not yet been taught anything by life. He began to move his hand, out of sight behind his own seat, toward his own pistol. The instant it moved, I brought the butt of the rifle across the side of his neck. He went down over the gear lever and stayed there, conscious but with nothing working properly, and I reached over and took the pistol out of his pocket and put it away. Then I put the muzzle against the driver's kidney and repeated myself, "Yamahiro-cho. Yamahiro-cho is not far from Beihu. It is badly lit, badly maintained, and nobody administers it. You can make as much noise there as you like." The driver, a young man named Suzuki Kenji, had heard the sound his boss's neck made and had decided not to be in that category. He was also the only one of the three without a gun. He drove, and then he was prodded again. "Watch your speed. Don't give the traffic police a reason." He had not thought of it. He thought of it the instant I said it, and I watched the entire idea arrive and die in the mirror. Break a traffic law, get pulled over, be saved. He was, by the end of that journey, crying. I did not knock any of them out. You cannot get killing intent off an unconscious man. All three of them, including the one I had been resting my feet on, were awake when we arrived. I found a quiet corner, had him stop, and took them out one at a time and wrapped my scarf up over my face and got the baton out. Today is a meeting day, but a sudden kidnapping is an unavoidable accident, exactly like a sudden murder. The organization would understand. Two of them gave up their killing intent inside 4 minutes. The third one did not. Tanaka Hiroshi had spent the drive updating his model and had concluded correctly that I was not going to kill him. And on that basis, he had decided that he was going to get out of this and then kill both members of the band, and then, when the opportunity arose, kill me. So the killing intent did not come off. It thickened. I have never seen that before. It got denser and better and more fragrant while I worked, and after a while he stopped reacting much at all and simply lay there getting more valuable. I stood over him and thought about the problem from an angle I had not needed before, and then all 5 of my ghosts stopped moving at once and looked past me. Absinthe. I did not jump. I am fairly pleased about that. I stopped what I was doing, unhurriedly, and turned around. A black car at the mouth of the alley with the near side windows down, rum in the front, and in the rear window, a blonde woman with pale eyes looking straight at me. I nodded to Rum, then I could not help looking at her. She was wearing a considerable amount of it, and when our eyes met, it visibly thickened, which is a compliment of sorts. I got the baton away before they were close enough to see it. I want to explain why I had not noticed them, because it bothered me for weeks. At the Baker complex, Rum's car had turned the corner at the exact moment the kidnappers were pushing me into the van, so the vehicle and the kidnappers' own killing intent had masked him. And then, being Rum, he had overthought the entire situation and deliberately hung back at a distance to observe, which kept him outside my ghost's range for the whole journey. He also, it later emerged, had a sniper on a rooftop watching me work. My boss has explained this to me since, at length, and I have never had the heart to correct any of it. He had constructed a theory in the car. Several theories. That Absinthe was quietly targeting somebody significant and had been discovered, or that the kidnapping was connected to something important, and that Absinthe had allowed himself to be taken in order to get inside and had steered the vehicle toward the agreed meeting point in order to act first and inform the organization afterward. He borrowed a sniper who was not busy and watched and waited to see what magnificent structure was going to reveal itself. After several minutes, he confirmed the following. The purpose of the operation was that Absinthe wanted to hit somebody. He watched a while longer to be certain, then he put the cigarette out and told the sniper to pack up. He has told Stout since that this was the moment he understood that even a talented subordinate has flaws he cannot conceal, and that this explained certain negative newspaper items about a detective who assaults suspects. There are few perfect things in this world. He got out of the car and came and looked down at 3 men on the ground, all of whom were extremely damaged and all of whom were visibly, obviously, deliberately alive. I believe I said, he said, that you were to maintain the public image appropriate to a detective. There was an accident. I looked down at the accident. I thought the kidnapping was aimed at me and I wanted to know why, and I only realized they had the wrong man once I was in the vehicle. If I hadn't acted at that point, I would probably be dead. I hit them so they wouldn't lie to me, and they are kidnappers. If anybody saw it, it's self-defense. Rum looked at me through his hair and did not believe a single word. He had, from the moment of arrival, seen that the man who did the pushing had been standing near me, disguised as an ordinary pedestrian, for some time before the van arrived, and it is entirely against my established behavior to fail to notice a stranger loitering beside me. His model of me says that I examine everybody who comes within 4 meters, and that if I find one suitable, I will start a conversation with them in preparation for a future case. The idea that I did not clock a man standing next to me is, in his assessment, absurd. A weak excuse. He had intended to say so and then put the pistol against my head to encourage reflection. But on second thoughts, the final line did hold up. To the police, this is self-defense and produces no lasting problem, which meant that Absinthe had thought it through and simply had not taken his boss's advice about his public image very seriously. Rum felt unexpectedly a little better about the whole thing. "Get in," he said. Then, "Give me the gun." I had, in fairness, taken 2. He knew about one of them. A young man who has acquired a firearm is a young man whose judgment is temporarily suspended, and I have never bought one on the black market because he told me not to, and being able to refuse a purchase is not the same as being able to refuse a gift. I handed it over. I forgot. He threw it to Stout without looking, and then, as I took a step toward the car, said, "There's another one." I stopped. Then I turned around and after a pause asked, with what I hoped was innocence, "Were you watching for long? Because how in the world had my ghosts not noticed a man on a roof?" He gave a short non-committal noise which contained an entire lecture about the supervision of subordinates, including gifted ones. I got no answer, so I lifted my shirt and took the second pistol out of my waistband and handed that over as well. He weighed it. Then he looked at the 3 men on the ground. Then he looked back at me. "That's all of them," I said. "One of them wasn't armed." He looked me over, decided there was nowhere left to hide anything, and gestured me into the car. I got the rear door open, and behind me there were 3 shots. I got in and looked out of the window. The 3 men on the ground had stopped moving, and the ground under their heads was going dark. Tanaka Hiroshi's magnificent killing intent came off him instantly and entirely because a dead man cannot kill anybody. I did not need to get out to collect it. Miss Tengu and the mermaid were racing each other before the second shot. There were also 3 new shikigami, and none of them went to Rum. They came up out of the bodies, and they writhed for a while, and looked at the man standing over them with the gun, and then, one after another, they went back down and put their arms around their own corpses. Miss Tengu has seen this before, and got on with the job. The mermaid swam around one of the new ones several times. Then she took hold of its sleeve and tugged gently, twice. It did not come. She had to be called back when the car pulled away, and she came, and she looked out of the rear window for a long time. Rum could not see any of this. He put the spare pistols in the glove compartment, sent a message to somebody nearby about a van and 3 bodies, and pulled out into traffic. I looked back at the alley for a while. Then Champagne, across the seat, glanced over. I nodded to her politely. The corner of her mouth moved, entirely without her permission. She caught it about a fifth of a second later, put her chin on her hand, and turned to look out of the far window. Here is what Champagne had been thinking for the previous 3 days, which she has since told me, in pieces, in circumstances I will come to. She had arrived in Japan quietly, and had spent her first week doing 2 things, managing her own retirement and investigating Ren Yamamoto and Hana Mizuki. And in the course of the second one, she had discovered that a member of her organization lived next door to the Yamamoto house and shared a classroom with both of them. She had gone through my file and had wondered, with a certain amount of adrenaline, whether I had been involved in the cool guy's death. She had also worked out that if I had known him as a child, I would know what he looked like at 6, which is dangerous. And by the time she got into the car that morning, she had settled it, and the verdict was, absolute threat to both of my people, remove. Then she actually met me. She has told me that this is the part she did not expect. The imaginary enemy in her head had been a shape. The person standing in an alley in a scarf was an 18-year-old with a padded stick. and on the way into town she found herself thinking, in spite of everything, that the reconstruction did not hold. A year ago, I had been nobody. I had no access to Rum, and no way to influence him, and Rum is not a man who is influenced. Whereas Ren Yamamoto has a strong sense of justice, an excessive curiosity, and a demonstrated habit of following suspicious men in black behind buildings. Him getting hit over the head and dosed is not a conspiracy. It is a Tuesday. She pinched the bridge of her nose and pulled herself back to the present. The present being that having Absinthe standing near her angel was like putting ink in milk, and that she knew the truth about the compound, and knew that the odds were poor but not zero, and that her cool guy might still be alive in some other form, somewhere on the drive she committed, must be removed. Rum, meanwhile, was watching all of this in the mirror and revising his own plans. He had brought us together because Absinthe has, in his professional assessment, certain psychological issues, not severe, but occasionally obstructive, and Champagne is the organization's specialist in getting inside people. He had intended to hand me over to her and let her manage it. Now he was watching her radiate dislike at the back of my head and thinking, this is not careful enough, because he could detect that hostility in 11 minutes of shared journey, which meant Absinthe, who talks psychologists into things, would have detected it in one. And if I ever ran out of patience, the papers would carry an item about an international film star dying far from home. And Champagne is not a soft target either. Her partners die at a rate that has been noticed. Her temporary assignments die at a rate that has been noticed twice. The comparison he made privately, and I treasure it, is with himself. Rum has used exactly one subordinate for many years, and the subordinate is still alive. My boss told me all of this himself later, in a car, as a warning, and I have never been able to decide whether he knew he was flattering her. If she were not so useful and so favored, she would have been called to account long ago. So he sat in that car and thought, is handing Absinthe to Champagne actually a good idea? Then he found what he considered the answer. She had been perfectly normal about the new recruit before today. Curious, almost enthusiastic. The change came after she learned Absinthe's identity as a detective and saw his face, which could mean anything, or it could mean Port. Champagne has never hidden her dislike of Port. And in the year before Port defected, Port never hid the fact that she was looking after a certain young errand boy whose parents had died pushing her out of the road. That is, in the internal logic of the organization, entirely sufficient. And Champagne had opened her own conversation in the car by demanding to know how much longer Port was going to be left running around, which confirmed it. Rum took his eyes off the mirror, satisfied. This woman has time to bear grudges, he thought. She could spend it working. He took us to the Baca complex, and Champagne changed her face in the car and walked in as somebody else and got into the lift, and then discovered that the other three of us had pressed a button that went up. She stood there with her fingers still out. The bar had moved. 3 minutes later, she was sitting in a very elegant sushi restaurant, reading a menu, looking at me, and understanding. The bars the organization uses as bases are real businesses. They are also more strictly run than ordinary bars, not less, because the ownership is quiet, and the last thing quiet ownership wants is a licensing inspection, which means that if a place has to check identification, it checks everybody's because the staff rotate and you cannot brief a whole roster on which customers are exempt. And because Absinthe is 18. Champagne made a very small sound. She has told me, been planning to get several things out of me at that bar, chemically, and then quite possibly finish the afternoon. Now she would have to wait for Rum to leave this ridiculous sushi restaurant and find another opportunity. Rum, having decided against the introduction, did not raise the subject of my psychology at all. Instead, he took a folder out of a briefcase and put it on the table. This is the next one. It has to happen without the press or the police noticing that we were involved. What do you think? I pulled the folder over and looked at Champagne, since he had said you in the plural. She was not interested in the slightest, so I opened it myself. The usual few pages. A full-length photograph of a middle-aged man with a very high hairline, small eyes, a broad nose, thin, in a suit, surrounded by people whose posture said, bodyguard. Kaito Nakamura, sitting member of the House of Representatives. He had done business with the organization for years, in the ordinary way, through money and access. Then he had been caught taking bribes. The organization had publicly helped him and privately concluded that a man in a prison cell talks and had begun preparing. Rum had intended to design the whole thing himself and brief everybody at the last possible moment, which is correct procedure. But we were all sitting there anyway, so he decided to give it to me early. I read it and was mildly surprised because you do not normally show a member the file on someone that senior in advance. Then I understood. Nakamura is not a serious politician who guards himself against unknown forces. He is a man who cooperated with one until it owned him. The file even named his driver as one of ours. Killing him is not the hard part. The hard part is making sure nobody notices that somebody wanted him dead. And there was a second function to handing us the file. which I appreciated, which is that if any part of that document ever surfaced anywhere, Rum would know which of the two people in that room had leaked it, which meant that showing it to us was also a statement that he did not currently think either of us would. I read it for a while, made a thoughtful face, and started copying out the answer. I gather Nakamura dislikes detectives. If anybody around him mentions one, he tells them off, at length. I turned a page, which makes sense if he's connected to us. It's a protective habit. Either way, in that environment, everyone near him is going to be wary of a detective, so I can't get close and I can't influence anyone around him. The only opportunity is in public, and a man at that level has a diary. I can survey a venue in advance and arrange an accident, a car, a falling object, a gas leak. Rum nodded. It was more or less his own plan. Then he stopped. Dislikes detectives, he said. That isn't in the file. No, I said, and put my hand up to my temple as though remembering. One of the ladies who comes in about her cat was complaining about him a while back. He's an arrogant man. It makes you want to get to know him better. That sentence is internally contradictory, and I said it on purpose. I have never had a more reliable translator. I have also never had one who was more wrong. Stout, who had been listening while pretending not to, went still for a moment and then translated it. His translation, which he later reported to himself as a breakthrough, was, "It makes you want to get closer to the people around him, so that one of those people will develop a sudden urge to remove Counselor Nakamura's head from his shoulders." And the moment he had that translation, the sentence made perfect sense, and he felt much better. Stout picked up his tea and drank it with no expression. For about half a second, he told himself afterward, he had genuinely believed that the young man opposite was a cheerful sort, who, having been coldly rebuffed, still wanted to make friends. This child is far too good at looking harmless. No wonder people keep walking into it. He pinched his own palm under the table, as a reminder that the moment he relaxed around Absinthe would be the moment he died. Rum was already laying out the mechanics of it. He is normally a man of firepower and rapid exits, but when the target's identity requires discretion, he can produce something quite delicate. Stay in Tokyo for the next few days. All right, I paused. Am I taking part in this one? Because I had been operating for some time on the working assumption that this year and next were my growth period and that I could avoid collaborative work and coast. He did not answer. Instead, he said, "Kato Yumi is a regular at your agency." I said, and needed a moment. She has a British short hair with a wandering disposition, and she comes in about once a fortnight, and I have always privately thought that Kat does not look energetic enough to get that far. Also, regular customer is a peculiar phrase to apply to a detective agency, and I have never entirely made peace with it. She is, I said. He was watching me. I had just received money, ghosts, and killing intent from this man over the course of a year and had answered him in grunts, so I decided to make an effort and produced everything I had. Full-time housewife. Her husband, Kato Daiki, used to act and now chairs Nido Pictures. Son and a daughter. The daughter's still at school. The son works at the company. Something moved at the back of my head while I was speaking, and I did not pause. Pleasant family. No enemies at all. Stout detected in that final sentence a distinct note of regret. He also considered it pointless. If the Naito family had enemies, a woman who visits Absinthe's office every fortnight would already be in the newspapers. Rum knocked ash into the tray and said, "Kato Yumi's maiden name was Hoshino." Hoshino. I looked like a student who has just heard the examinable part of a lecture. I opened the folder again, and my eye went straight to the page. Among the counselor's forthcoming engagements, a memorial service for the film director Takeshi Hoshino. Rum watched me find it and nodded because it confirmed that although I read quickly, I read properly and had retained a line that had nothing to do with anything. She is Director Hoshino's youngest daughter. You are a public figure now, so she may well send you an invitation. If she does, don't take any special steps to avoid it. He is right about the gatherings, and he is right about the reason, and I find that more unsettling every time I think about it. His reasoning, which he explained to nobody, was that I enjoy gatherings and rarely turn one down, presumably because a room full of strangers is a room full of potential material, and that a sudden refusal would look strange to anybody watching, and that even without bringing me into the operation, being in the room would let me watch the organization work, which would make future collaboration easier. I was not going to refuse. Even if he had said nothing, I would have found a way into that building because a memorial service attended by a man who is about to be assassinated is the best possible use of an evening. He and Stout left shortly afterward. Rum had something on. I went downstairs and bought a large quantity of expensive tea. Because that afternoon had taught me something, and I wanted to fix it before I lost it, which is that I have been valuing clients by their names and their file, and the file is not the person. Nobody knows who somebody's father was. Nobody knows which case a woman is going to be standing next to in 11 months. So, better tea, a better attitude, less of the polite blankness I use to make people go away faster. This time, I had not even known the name of a client's father, which for a man with my particular advantage is a professional disgrace. I came out of the building weighing up the underground against the bus, and every ghost I owned made a noise at once. Then there was a weight on my back and an arm across my shoulders. The first thing I got was apples. The second thing I got was a face I knew, at a distance of about 15 centimeters, which is far too close to identify anybody. Wavy brown hair to the waist, regular features, slightly heavy makeup. My English teacher. The face was hers. The person inside it was not. I looked at the killing intent I had said goodbye to 20 minutes earlier, pushed the arm off, and said with hesitation, "Miss Harida? It's me." Her own voice. She smiled and pulled a strand of brown hair back off my cheek. "Do you want to go to a bar? Stout says you prefer the atmosphere to a sushi restaurant." Is Stout really that much of a gossip? I put the question away. I looked at my ghosts, who had already abandoned me and were swarming her, and at the killing intent on her, which was of a quality comparable to Rum's, and I wanted very badly to skip every intermediate step and say yes, immediately, let's go. Instead, I gave her a cool look and said in a tone that was not friendly, "You've been investigating me." I meant the face. She was wearing my English teacher. I also knew that she had not learned that face from watching me. She had learned it because she had been to Tayton High School herself, looking for information about a missing student, and had stood in a corridor and studied whoever walked past. Wearing my teacher was a way of implying she had been studying me, which conveniently concealed why she had actually been there. And it was a hook, and I bit it on purpose. She took her arm back and turned serious. "Rum thinks you need a therapist. That's me. Honestly though, I dislike Port, and by extension I don't much like you, so today I'm only going to talk to you, assess you, and then recommend somebody more suitable." A pause. "It'll take a while. Shall we sit down somewhere and have a drink?" That was entirely fabricated. She simply needed a legitimate reason to take me somewhere. Her working model of me came from Stout, and Stout's model is that Absinthe is a thrill seeker who will put his own safety a long way down the list if something is interesting enough. So either the excuse would work or I would spot the hole in it and come anyway out of curiosity. She was right, obviously, but for the wrong reason. I let a silence run for exactly as long as I could justify. Then I said, "All right," like a teenager who cannot stand to be provoked, walking into something with his eyes open because he wants to see what it is. She smiled as though the result had never been in doubt. We walked to the lift side by side. She took my arm with one hand, and with the other she wiped something across my face twice. Her fingertips were cool and had something on them. In the lift mirror, I found that my cheekbones were higher, and the whole middle of my face had been lengthened with shadow, and I now looked about 25, and at a glance I would not have recognized myself. That is extremely convenient. I should get Ace to teach me, although I do not have high hopes because I have watched Dr. Tanaka's gadgets produce one result in Watson's hands and a completely different result in everybody else's, and I have a suspicion that disguise in this world may work the same way. The bar is called the Black Hegelson, and it is formal enough not to check everybody, only the ones who obviously need it, and at 25, I was not one of those. The hall is very dark, and the music is loud enough that a conversation at a table is private. I took out a disinfectant wipe and removed her work from my face because it was convenient and extremely ugly. In the 90 seconds available, she had solved for age and had not considered anything else. She went to a corner without needing directions. She could have taken a private room. She specifically did not, because a closed room would have made me wary, and because a person surrounded by other people feels safe, and a person who feels safe relaxes, and a person who relaxes can be worked on. She watched me look around the room like somebody who has not been in one before, which I was doing on purpose, and something in her face went slightly warmer. The drinks list was in a hidden compartment in the table edge. She took it out and turned a few pages. "Belarusian," she told the waiter. That was hers. Then her eye went down the page and stopped at Tokyo iced tea. It looks like a glass of iced tea. It tastes considerably sweeter than any spirit has a right to. It has an alcohol content that will remove a grown adult from the evening without their noticing the transition. She looked at it for a while. Its reputation is the problem. Everybody has heard of it. It might get past her angel. It would not necessarily get past a boy with a documented circle of friends, including several men over 20 who have almost certainly briefed him. She closed the list. "Bring him a cola first." The waiter turned to me automatically and paused. Because a large volume of cola immediately before spirits demolishes your tolerance, and this waiter has watched men use exactly that sequence on young women. He looked at the arrangement in front of him, which was the same maneuver pointed in the other direction, and had a private thought about how times change. Also, was the young man over 20? He did not look it. But he was inside, so the door staff must have checked, and if they had not, that was their liability, and not his. He wrote it down without a flicker, and left. Out of her sight, he glanced back at me, once, with an expression I have not been able to classify. It was somewhere between sympathy and envy. Here is what she did not know. Ever since I learned that this world contains a functionally unlimited supply of poison, sleeping tablets, and sodium hydroxide, I have been using a technique that sits in the corner of the spirit medium curriculum under things you will probably never need. You line your own stomach with puppet clay. It is not exotic. It is not difficult. The reason it lives in the corner of the textbook is that almost no student ever collects enough shikigami to make clay of the required fineness, and until you can make a bag that does not leak, the exercise is theoretical. Mine had got there about 4 months earlier. It is, at that grade, just about capable of holding liquid. It does not last forever. It is fine for one drinking session, and at worst I can excuse myself, empty it, and come back. So the cola arrived, and I drank it, and it went down my throat and stopped about 2 centimeters above my stomach wall. Then the cocktail started. She ordered them in a specific order: colorful, mild tasting, apparently weak, each one stronger than the last. She did not hurry any of it, because she needed the evening to be long, and because if I finished my drink and left, the whole plan collapsed. So we sat and watched a band nobody was listening to, and she rested her chin on her hand and did an excellent impression of a woman enjoying herself. I drank 6 things and thought about the future. The mermaid arranged Killing Intent on the tabletop between us into a neat descending row, largest to smallest, and adjusted it twice. And I looked at the thousand-faced witch of the Black Organization and observed with some satisfaction that she was steadily smelling more of alcohol and less of murder. The parents' ghosts were around my ankles. They had recognized her from the photograph within 4 seconds of the arm going across my shoulders and had not let go since. The effect was considerably faster than I had estimated. I had allowed for 1 evening of groundwork. I was getting a full conversion in 90 minutes. She has more give in her than I expected. I would not have guessed that from the file. She had a capsule between her fingers under the table for most of the second hour. Her reasoning, which she has explained to me since with disturbing frankness, ran as follows. Given her standing, killing a member with some potential would not be seriously punished because Absinthe was new and had no achievements worth the paperwork. Rum would be annoyed. Rum would have no authority to act on it. Even Rum has to obtain permission before removing a code name, and she does not. So killing me was, administratively, trivial. She could simply put the contents of the capsule into a glass. That was the plan she came in with. And somewhere around the 4th cocktail, listening to the music, she began to think that a person who knew as much as I appeared to know was worth keeping for a while. She could kill me at any time. There was no urgency. Squeeze first. Then she looked at how many drinks I had put away after a large glass of cola and concluded that not even a career drinker survives that, and decided it was time. I saw her turn her head and slowed everything down by about 15%, which is a thing I learned to do from a year of standing around crime scenes pretending not to be interested, because there is a mistake people make about drunkenness, which is that they think the drunk one is at the disadvantage. Very often, it is the sober person who is in trouble. A sober listener will accept an exaggerated confession from somebody who appears to be drunk, because being drunk certifies it as true. Getting information out of somebody is a skill, and it cuts both ways, and if you do it badly, you leave with a head full of things that are not so. Also, I had my own agenda. Of the 3 plans I had for champagne, the one I wanted was coexistence. A stable supply of very high-grade apple, a free disguise service, and access to cases I could not reach on my own. If that failed, my fallback was to hope she died and dropped a ghost fetus. And I want to be honest that this is a bad fallback, because the drop rate on organization members is not what I had assumed. Tequila dropped nothing, and a living champagne is a renewable resource with a ghost fetus attached to it as a reserve. A dead one is a single flat shikigami permanently. Also, again, she is a woman and does not meet my requirements. All told, killing her is a net loss. She leaned in, put her chin on her folded hands, closed about 8 centimeters of the distance between us, and said, over a table smelling of alcohol, "I've been reading about you, and something's been bothering me. Why did so many people say you were possessed by Ren Yamamoto's ghost when you started out?" I looked at her for a few seconds. Then, the papers stitch things together. It's boring. They do like to invent, she agreed warmly, and thought, at the same time, he is drunk. Listen to that. He sounds like Rum. Absinthe is not the pleasant boy he presents as. He is much closer to Rum underneath. She was, at that point, 4 drinks in herself, and she was doing what people at 4 drinks do, which is producing confident summaries. Then she steered. It's a striking coincidence, though. You're his neighbor and his classmate, and the exact moment he disappears, you appear. A small pause. Did you get the idea of a detective who incites crimes from watching him? I did not nod, and I did not shake my head. I let my eyes go somewhere else, as though remembering. She watched me closely and registered something she had not expected, which is that the name Ren Yamamoto had produced no hostility whatsoever. That surprised her. She had assumed that even if I had nothing to do with the dosing, somebody like me would loathe a boy that righteous. Then she corrected herself, because that assessment did not fit either. My mental state is not that of an ordinary person, but after an evening of it she was finding that I was not unpleasant company, and could not be filed under dark without doing violence to the category. It was, she decided, more complicated than that, given what I had been through, and she pinched her own thigh under the table to stop herself. She had not intended to drink at all. She had ordered things for herself that sounded strong and were not, in order to keep pace without cost. 4 of them still float you slightly. She was, she told herself, considerably more sober than I was. She got herself back on target. The compound rum used on that detective is still experimental. It isn't reliably lethal, and I've read the file. Ren Yamamoto was reported missing. No body was ever found. His death was confirmed by Port. She let a beat go, and Port has since defected, which makes everything she signed off worth rather less. Personally, I think Rum made a mistake that night, and I think that detective may very well be alive. I looked at the killing intent thinning on her shoulders and had to turn my head away because it was genuinely difficult to watch. Then I remembered I was acting. After a few seconds I said, "Yamamoto is dead." Champagne's eyes narrowed slightly. There it is. Because neither the police nor the organization's cleanup team ever saw a body. Without a body, you cannot confirm a death. That is not an opinion, it is procedure. And this man had just stated it as a fact, twice as flatly as anyone at that table had any right to. At the time of the dosing, Absinthe had been an unknown peripheral errand boy. Unless he had personally hidden the body or watched somebody else dispose of it, neither of which fitted anything, there was only one remaining explanation. The cool guy is not dead. And Absinthe knows it as his neighbor or as his classmate, and is concealing it from a member of his own organization. Something in her chest lifted. Across the table I watched her expression change in the black reflection of the tabletop, and was extremely satisfied with the evening's work. I want to be clear that I had not said anything except that sentence. She built all of it herself, and my sentence was defensible from any angle, because Rum has stated that Ren Yamamoto is dead. And Absinthe, discovered and promoted by Rum, would naturally trust his boss's assessment over that of a woman he had met 4 hours earlier, absent evidence. Even if she repeated the entire conversation to the whole organization, there was nothing in it that could be held against me. "Really dead?" she said, pressing. "Because people at your school told me he's simply away working on a difficult case and can't get back. Even if that's only a rumor, rumors need a shadow to stand in." She leaned a little closer. "And Rum has never been careful about disposing of bodies. You aren't covering up a mistake of his, are you?" That was the actual technique, not the questions, the sequence of them. When a person is drunk, their front runs about a half-second behind their face, and she was reading the half-second. She also, in fairness to her, kept the framing on me and Rum the entire time, so that if I remembered the conversation the next day, I would remember being asked about my boss rather than about a school friend. I glanced up and then down into my glass and said, "Yamamoto is dead." She smiled. "And the evidence? What are you hiding?" 1 second. 2. At 3, she watched Absinthe give up thinking entirely, push his glass away, lower himself onto the table, and close his eyes. Champagne said, "She has told me that she had genuinely overestimated the moral fiber of today's young people, and that at the climax of a serious confrontation, I had elected to pretend to be asleep." She sat back. She had got a very great deal for one evening's work, and she was prepared to call it. She reached for her bag, and as she picked it up she registered, in her peripheral vision, that the 2 extremely well-preserved women at the next table had subtly changed the angle of their bodies. She knows exactly what that means. She has spent her life reading precisely that. The instant she stood up and left, both of them were going to come over. Champagne said, She stood there in a dark bar with her bag in her hand, looking at an unconscious 18-year-old and then at 2 women in their 40s, and experienced, by her own account, a dilemma without precedent in her career. 15 minutes later, she was walking a boy into the lobby of a hotel 2 streets away with most of his weight on her shoulder. "No reservation," she said to the desk. Twin. I want to record that her reason for moving me was not that she was worried about what might happen to me in a bar. Her reason was that if I woke up in a strange place surrounded by strangers, I might start talking about the organization, which would be a problem for the organization and therefore for her. Also, walking me across the road, she had begun to suspect that she had not been fooled at all. For somebody who does not drink regularly, that quantity of alcohol produces exactly this. She concluded that I had lain down to escape a question and then, quite genuinely, gone to sleep about 90 seconds later, which made taking me away the correct decision after all. The lift went up under the interested gaze of the desk staff. She got the door open, threw me on the bed, and pulled the blanket over me. Then she stood there for a moment, decided that a person like Absinthe did not merit that, and pulled it off again. And in the process of pulling it off, she noticed the shape of a phone in my pocket and stopped. Because when she had lured me out of that building, the plan had ended with a body. And if the plan no longer ended with a body, then the body had other uses, and she had just gone to a great deal of trouble to move it somewhere private. She bent down and took the phone out. Then she thought for a second and went through all the other pockets. She got a wallet, keys, a canister of anesthetic, a telescoping baton, and a second phone, black. Behind her, from a slatted vent in the wardrobe door, a single almond-shaped eye was watching. There was a mark under it that was almost invisible in the dark. Pretending to be asleep is a skill. For me it is not, because I do not have to pretend. I put a puppet together in the wardrobe, moved into it, and left my body on the bed doing nothing, which is a state my body is extremely good at. It also meant that if champagne went too far, I could come out of a wardrobe and hit her, righteously, from behind. I had a wooden coat hanger. It was heavier than it looked. The parent's ghost stayed on my body's legs the whole time, working. She started with the phones. Both had lock screens, so she took a decoding unit the size of a playing card out of her bag and connected it and let it run. I did not stop her. If champagne had not gone through my phone, I would have been worried about her. In my model of the evening, this was the first step. The entire objective was to get her to find out herself that our goals do not conflict, because members of that organization are constitutionally suspicious. If I had walked up to her and announced that I was protecting Hana Mizuki and Ren Yamamoto, she would have concluded that I was working an angle and would have killed me for it. That is the only method that works on people like us, and I know it works because it is the one that works on me. She needed to discover it, on her own, ideally while feeling clever. While the decoder ran, she went through the rest of the pile. She picked up the anesthetic canister first, out of curiosity, and there was nothing written on it, so she opened the cap carefully and wafted a little toward her face and sniffed. Anesthetic. Only anesthetic. Not cyanide. Relief crossed her face. And then something more complicated arrived immediately behind it, because she caught herself being relieved and did not understand why. She worked it out to her own satisfaction in about 4 seconds. The less depraved Absinthe turns out to be, the safer her angel is, therefore relief is rational. Having verified that her judgment was operating normally and that the alcohol had not affected her, she restored the canister to the exact position it had been in and put it carefully back on the pile. Then she picked up the baton. She has told me that the texture of it startled her. Weapons are not soft. She had watched me use it on 3 men that afternoon, at length, with real force, and had noted at the time that they were remarkably undamaged for men who could not stand up. She had put that down to their being tough. Now she understood it was the weapon, and her first interpretation was that the extra layer was there to prolong the process. Then she thought about it properly, and thought about a detective who spends most of his working life within sight of police officers and journalists, and concluded that I almost never get to hold somebody down for a long time, and that even an ordinary baton would still be self-defense, which meant the padding was not there to extend anything. It was there to reduce the damage while subduing a criminal. She nodded to herself. Whether the friendliness is genuine or performed, she thought, this is a better result than I expected. No wonder Angel is willing to be near him. That is not only her kindness, some of that is him. Then she turned it over in her hand, found something with her thumb, and the folded baton went off like a spring. It came out at full extension in about a 1/20th of a second. She got most of the way out of the path. Being 4 drinks in, most of the way was not enough, and the tip caught her under the chin. She sat down on the carpet with a hand over her mouth. She was there for several seconds. Then she got up with no expression at all, folded the baton back into its collapsed form, and put it through a beautiful high arc into the waste paper basket across the room. Then she remembered that a custom baton is not easy to replace. She went over, fished it out, came back, and dropped it on the pile with the rest. I want it noted that I watched all of this through the slats of a wardrobe door and did not make a sound, and that this is one of the great achievements of my life. The decoder finished. She flicked through the organization phone in about 11 seconds and put it down, because there are no secrets in that organization that she does not already have. Then she picked up the ordinary one, contacts, a starred list of people I keep an eye on. 2 Maurice, Hiroshi, and Ran, which she found convenient. since I use full names as contact names, and she did not have to guess. She wrote Rand's number down. Then she went down the rest of the list in a good mood and stopped. Watson Edogawa. It is a rare surname. It is also a rare given name. And it happens that there are two famous writers of detective fiction whose names sit either side of it. That is not a name a parent gives a child. That is a name somebody chooses. Something moved in her. She scrolled all the way to the end of the starred list and then jumped to the letter K to look for Ren Yamamoto and found nothing. Not saved or saved without a label. And then the phone buzzed in her hand. An email from Hana Mizuki. There was a photograph attached of a glow stick about the length of a forearm, lit blue. Buy 2, get 1 free, I saved you one. The concert runs 6 until 9. If your job finishes early, come and find us. Champagne read it and, without deciding to, imagined the face of the person who had written it. Her mood improved considerably. The floor beside the hotel bed had a deep pile carpet. She sat down on it with her back against the bed frame, leaned her upper body over onto the mattress, and began going through 11 months of correspondence between me and Hana Mizuki with the enthusiasm of a treasure hunt. She has no shame about this at all. She has told me she enjoyed it enormously. And what she found, over about 40 minutes, was that whatever the school had told her, my relationship with her angel was considerably closer than she had believed. And from the way Rand thanked me for things, and from what some of those things were, it emerged that I had, on more than one occasion, saved that girl's life, which produced a feeling she describes as gratification, and then immediately, a new idea. If Absinthe has feelings for the girl, then the boy who has feelings for the same girl is an obstacle, and that, she thought, is a motive, a real one, the kind that stands up, except that if he were jealous enough to want the cool guy dead, then when the name Yamamoto came up in that bar, there should have been something. Guilt, hatred, distaste, the private satisfaction of a man discussing an enemy he has already dealt with, and she remembered the moment very clearly, and there had been none of it. What there had been, if she was honest, was something else entirely. It had felt less like sitting opposite a rival and more like being watched, guarded. The way you look at a thing you are keeping an eye on. She frowned at the screen and sat still for a while. Then she opened my contacts, found Hana Mizuki, held her fingertip over the call key for about 3 seconds, and pressed it. At the concert hall, Ran and Yui had been inside for an hour and were on their feet with the rest of the room when Ran's phone went off in her pocket. She looked at the screen and was surprised because it was me. He's finished. It's only just started. He can still get here. Her seat was on the aisle. She said something to Yui, slipped out, and went up toward the doors, both to take the call and to get outside with the spare ticket in case I was already at the entrance. Yui heard none of it because the room was extremely loud. She assumed Ran had gone to the lavatory, waved, pulled Ran's bag onto her lap, and went back to waving her glow stick. By the time Ran found somewhere quiet enough, the call had rung out, so she went up on her toes to look at the doors and called back. It connected, and a voice she has known since she was 6 years old said, "Why did that take you so long to answer?" Ran stopped moving. It was Ren Yamamoto. "Shinichi, have you finished the case?" She had been told several times over the past year that he was buried in something difficult and could not come back until it was over, and now he was calling her from my phone on a night when I was in Tokyo, which meant he was back. Or, and she considered this properly because she is not stupid, I had gone to wherever he was working. She had been told my commission that day was still undefined, and she knows how detectives work. A cautious client will not tell you what the job is until you are in the room. And if it really was that case, the difficult one, then it would make sense for the client to bring in a second detective, which raised a much worse possibility, which is that I would now be stuck in it too, and neither of them would be back for months. "Are you back?" she said. "Or did Li Wei come to you? Where are you? I'll come." I was watching her do it through a gap in a wardrobe door, and I could not hear the other half, and I have rarely wanted anything more. I heard every word of it, and I did not move a muscle. I was already moving by then, and I want you to know that I was moving toward it and not away. On the other end of the line, Champagne listened to all of it with her chin on her hand and a small triumphant smile. She learned voice work from a magician named Koji Nakamura some years ago, and she is very good at it. She can reproduce any voice she has heard. The voice she had answered in was Ren Yamamoto's, and from Ran's reply she had extracted the entire thing. Ran was surprised, she was pleased, she was slightly worried, she was not, at any point, astonished, and a girl whose dead childhood friend rings her up as though nothing has happened is astonished, which meant that Hana Mizuki does not believe Ren Yamamoto is dead, she thinks he is away working, which meant that Absinthe, who is close to that girl, could have established that fact in a single conversation without effort, and in a bar, 90 minutes earlier, Absinthe had insisted twice that Yamamoto was dead, in order to make the organization stop looking. Champagne laughed quietly, and thought about Rum's veiled approval of his new recruit. recruit. His judgment is as poor as ever. Then she looked at the person asleep on the bed beside her and considered that she had just caught him in an act of straightforward disloyalty, and that the evidence was completely useless to her because she would now have to help him cover it up. Angel might survive being ignorant. Her cool guy would not survive being reported. Then she realized something more useful, which is that Absinthe does not know how she feels about either of them, which makes the information an asset, a lever, held by somebody the other party cannot read. Provided the risk was managed carefully, she said a few things in Ren Yamamoto's voice, invented an explanation for the call, and hung up. Then her eye went back to the screen, to Watson Edogawa, and to a second number with no name at all. Here is what she saw. I rarely telephone anybody. My work runs on email, which means my call log is short and legible. And in that short legible log, there were more calls to one unlabeled number than to most of my named clients. And on 2 separate occasions, a call to that number ended and a call to Watson Edogawa began within the same minute. She looked from one to the other for some time. I want to explain why that log exists, because it is entirely my fault and entirely innocent. Watson goes out with 3 other children and gets into situations. When he does, he uses a bow tie that changes his voice and telephones Inspector Matsumoto as Ren Yamamoto because the police move faster for a name they know. And afterward, weighing the reliability of the police, the safety of 3 first graders, and the fact that Rinasami stands next to him saying Liwei told you to call him, he sometimes rings me from the same handset, and if Ran or Yui appears mid-call, he hides the Ren Yamamoto phone and picks up the Watson phone and carries on talking to the same person. That is the whole mechanism. Inside the wardrobe, watching her thumb move between 2 entries, I worked out what she had found about a second and a half after she found it. I had allowed for the phone. I had expected her to use it to tease Ran, and I had wanted her to, because that is how she would find out that our interests align. And I had left the call records intact on purpose, so that everything on the handset would look authentic, and she would not begin to wonder how much preparation had gone into an evening she believed she had arranged. What I had not allowed for was that she would catch a detail I had genuinely forgotten about and become suspicious of Watson Edogawa 2 years early. I stood in a wardrobe and thought about it. She was already suspicious. Knocking her unconscious was no longer available. The only version of that which worked ended with her dead, but if Watson's cover collapsed early, he and Ran would be no worse off, and most of the people around him would keep their mouths shut in front of her. Only one person would be in real danger. Rinasami does not go out. She is a technician with no social footprint, and she can stay invisible for a very long time, long enough for champagne to be drawn out, at which point Ran becomes the lever for a 3-way arrangement. And it was also entirely possible that before any of that, Daiki Ito's people would get to champagne first and turn her into a ghost fetus, or at worst, a shikigami. I concluded there was no serious problem, and settled in behind the slats to see what else she was going to do. She pressed the unlabeled number. I have thought about that sentence a great deal since. Her reasoning, which she has told me, was that if she got nothing, she could speak in my voice and say wrong number. And then she reconsidered even that because there was no need to say anything at all. It was my phone. Whatever mess resulted would be my mess to clean up, with the additional benefit of irritating me. The line rang, it connected, and a small boy's voice, with absolutely nothing of a child in the delivery, said, "Why are you calling this number? What's happened?" Watson was confused. I almost never ring him. He is a 6-year-old who requires a guardian, and if I want to take him anywhere, I have to go through Ran or Hiroshi, and we run into each other constantly anyway, at restaurants and at crime scenes, so anything I have to say gets said in person. What bothered him far more was that I had called the Ren Yamamoto handset. He is extremely careful about that. He knows I keep the 2 numbers strictly separate. I have never once mixed them up. So either something had happened to me on that commission and I was dialing at random, or I would like to note that he does all of this for me, unpaid, every time I am late. And he began to construct scenarios, because that is what he does, and within 4 seconds he had arrived at a violent criminal capable of putting a retired competitive fighter in a position where he could not read a screen, and then at a staged accident, and then at an explosion. Meanwhile, on the other end of the line, Champagne had stopped breathing. Because she had heard a voice she had last heard nearly 10 years ago, when she was calling herself Celeste Sterling and was a friend of Akiko Yamamoto, and there had been a talkative little boy in that house who liked to do impressions of adults reasoning things out. Every piece of information she had gathered that evening arrived at once and locked together, and she is one of perhaps 5 people alive who know what the compound actually does. "Hello?" said Watson, and his voice had changed because a silence that long is not a wrong number. Champagne came out of it and smiled with everything she had. Then, because she has never in her life left a good moment unexploited, she switched to Hana Mizuki's voice and said, sweetly, "This number? So you have another one. Why didn't you tell me?" Watson stopped walking. He was in the street. There were children laughing somewhere behind him, and a line of cold went down his back. Ran had rung Ren Yamamoto's phone, and Watson had answered it, and she had not asked a single question about that. She had gone straight past it into a joke. Even if she had somehow worked out that Shinichi is Watson, which would explain the lack of surprise, the other number was still impossible. He has never given Ran that number, specifically so that she can never ring Ren Yamamoto and have Watson's pocket buzz. When he contacts her as Shinichi, he uses email. When he has to call, he uses a public phone. But what Ran had just said implied that she had Ren Yamamoto's number saved, and that Ren Yamamoto ought to know it. And leaving all of that aside, why was Ran calling from my phone? And why was she not at a concert? There was no crowd behind that voice. There was no room behind that voice at all. Everything arrived at once, and he got there, and it took him about 2 seconds, which I maintain is remarkable. That is not Ran. Somebody has a voice changer, or somebody can do this with their own throat, which his mother has told him certain people can. Which means whoever it is has heard Hana Mizuki speak. His shirt went cold against his back. He put the drawl back on and said brightly, "I don't have another number. My phone's broken, so I borrowed one. I'm playing with my friends. Ran, weren't you at a concert? Why are you calling from Li Wei's phone? Is your phone broken too?" And while he was saying it, he took out the Watson handset with his other hand and sent a message to Yui, because if something had happened to Ran, Yui would have noticed, and he was praying Yui was still alive to notice it. Champagne listened to a small boy pretending to be a small boy and laughed under her breath. It was, she has told me, very cute. He was doing an impression of himself. I was watching her face from inside a wardrobe, and I saw the exact instant it landed, and my stomach went with it. Then something else registered. The very first thing the mini cool guy had said when he picked up the phone had not been in a child's voice at all. It had been in Ren Yamamoto's cadence, flat and adult and impatient, which meant that Absinthe did not merely know Ren Yamamoto was alive. He knew Ren Yamamoto had shrunk. And those are two completely different offenses. Failing to report that a target survived can be excused. A man might reason that a boy with no resources is not a threat and simply leave him alone. Failing to report that a human being has been physically reduced to the age of 6 by an experimental compound and then continuing to let that human being run around loose is not something any loyal member of that organization does. The promising talent Rum has his eye on, she thought, is really quite unreliable. Poor Rum. Although, is the bond between childhood friends genuinely that strong? She went back through her own memories of the Yamamoto house 10 years earlier and found that the little boy had talked constantly about a beautiful classmate called Hana Mizuki and had never once mentioned the neighbor. As children, they had clearly not been close at all. And now, there is something here I do not have. She shook her head and decided to look into it properly. This time, she admitted to herself she had claimed to be investigating Absinthe and had in fact spent the entire time investigating a missing detective and had picked up Jiangxia Tongji incidentally. She teased her godson for a while longer and hung up. Then she copied out both numbers, because if she was right, the next time she rang the one labeled Watson Edogawa, she would hear the same voice. She deleted the 2 calls from the log, dropped my phone back onto the bed among the mess she had made, and walked out of the room briskly. I was still lying on that bed with my eyes shut and my consciousness in a wardrobe, and I want you to understand that I had assumed she was gone for the night. I was 2 rooms away with a cup of tea, doing absolutely nothing, on purpose. I knew all of this was coming. I had known for a year. I want that in front of you before I tell you what I did next. She got as far as a pedestrian crossing. The night air did what night air does to 4 cocktails, and by the time the lights changed, she had stopped walking. She turned around and looked back up at the hotel and frowned, because she had just heard her own reasoning played back to her sober. Absinthe is close to her cool guy and her angel. She had spent the last hour treating that as a reason to leave him alive. It is not a reason, it is the reverse. He is currently covering for the boy. Nobody knows how long a rare streak of decency lasts in a man who is otherwise standing in the dark, and her assessment of that decency had been produced at 4 drinks, in a mood, by somebody who wanted it to be true. And Rum and Stout's reports both describe a mind that does not work like other people's. Which means the reason he has not reported Ren Yamamoto may have nothing to do with friendship at all. He may simply find the phenomenon entertaining. He may be keeping a shrunken detective near him to watch. He may enjoy the specific pleasure of running something small behind the organization's back. And if that is what it is, then the cool guy is a rare toy. And when a toy is about to be discovered and its owner is in danger, a man like that removes the toy and cleans up and produces exactly the sentence he had repeated to her twice that evening. Yamamoto is dead. She stood at a crossing and went cold, and then went colder, because the next thing arrived. Champagne has no public connection to Hana Mizuki or Ren Yamamoto. None. There is nothing anybody could find, which means Absinthe waking up tomorrow cannot possibly work out why she made those 2 calls. From the available evidence, he will conclude one thing, that she noticed something wrong in his answer at the bar and used his phone to check, which means she had, in the last 30 minutes, personally constructed every triggering condition for the scenario she had just invented. She turned around and started walking back. Her hand went into her bag for the capsules on the way. I want to be fair to her about the decision because she made it properly. She could not verify which version was true. She could investigate for a week and still not know because you cannot read a mind and because two people with identical behavior can have opposite reasons for it, and she had no week. The moment I woke up, I would understand my position and act, and in the worst case, she could not guarantee reaching a 6-year-old first. So the safe move was to do it, while I could not resist. I want to be fair to her. She was going to do it, and she was right to want to, and by every piece of evidence available to her, she was making the correct decision about me. She has told me that she felt sorry about it, and that there are things she has to protect, and that she shook her head slightly on the way up in the lift and thought, when did I get so soft? He is a colleague I met this afternoon. I have been away from the work too long. Back in the room, I had got up, put everything back in the correct pockets, straightened my collar, and was about to leave. Then I remembered something and went to the window instead and looked out through the gap in the curtains, and there was Miss Harida at the corner, standing perfectly still under a street light, and then turning round, and then walking back toward the hotel. I said, "What a tenacious woman." Then I stood there and thought about the aura properly for the first time. Its mechanism is not persuasion. It does not put an idea into anyone. What it does is make the person looking at me sort through everything I actually am and pick out the good and then keep picking and keep amplifying until the version of me in their head is entirely made of true things arranged flatteringly, and it lasts. Once that portrait is built, it does not fall over when I leave the room. It survives, as long as I never do anything gross enough to break it, but the reasoning comes back. Champagne had decided not to kill me because of a single fact, that I appeared to be protecting Ren Yamamoto, which she had then enlarged until it filled the whole frame, until it meant we could reach an agreement, until it meant we were not really enemies at all. Out of range, that fact went back to its actual size, and every risk she had airily waved away came back at full volume. It is exactly the feeling of buying something enormous on impulse, and then, on the train home, reading the total. That is why I almost never use it, not the cost, although the cost is real. The problem is that an irrational subject is useless to observe. You cannot learn anything about what somebody actually wants while they are being generous about you, and the moment they leave you have a person walking around with a full memory of the conversation and none of the mood, which is why I had spent that entire evening watching her instead of using it. The parent's ghost had held onto my legs all the same. They were following a standing order. I thought about all of this at a window for about 90 seconds, and then I went back and lay down on the bed exactly as I had been, because being asleep is worth more than being awake. Champagne does not panic under pressure. Pressure sharpens her. If I stood up and faced her, she would become entirely rational, and I would be dealing with the best version of the most dangerous woman in the organization. Asleep, she has to make the decision alone, with nothing to react to, at close range, for as long as it takes. That is the environment in which the aura does the most work for the least money. I lay down, and then I noticed the sheets. The creases were wrong. She had thrown me down, and I had got up, and a bed remembers that. I told myself that ordinary people do not read bedding. And then I remembered that this world has an unusual concentration of people who read bedding, and that any single detail can be the thing that ends you. So I rolled over twice to wreck the sheets properly, and then I kicked the pile of my own possessions off the edge of the bed, hard, and lay still. Then I put my consciousness back in the wardrobe to supervise. She picked the lock. She had left her room key inside when she went out, so it took her a while, which I enjoyed. The door came open, and she crossed the room in heels without stopping. By the time the door had swung shut and locked itself behind her, she was at the bedside. She went down on one knee, put a hand on my jaw, and started to force it open. The capsule was in her other hand. The jaw opened, and the other hand slowed down further, and stopped altogether when the phone lying next to my head lit up, buzzed, and showed the name Hana Mizuki on the screen. I want to give you her actual reconsideration because I have heard it, and because it is better than anything I could have engineered. I did not know any of this at the time. I was in a wardrobe with a coat hanger. She gave me the whole thing later, unprompted, and I have never worked out why. He told me all of this himself later and did not once suspect why I was listening so carefully. My own view, for what it is worth, is that I made my choice about 10 seconds before he made his. The worst case she had built at the crossing, that Absinthe is amusing himself and will destroy the boy the instant there is a risk, has holes in it. It has been a considerable time since Ren Yamamoto was dosed. A person keeping a toy would have got bored months ago. There would have been no reason to maintain a functioning friendship this long. And more than that, a genuinely dark mind, presented with a phenomenon like an adult reduced to a child, does not sit and watch it bounce around a neighborhood. It puts it in a room and finds out how it works. Nobody with that turn of mind refuses the experiment. And if Absinthe means no harm, if he actually regards those two as friends, then killing him is not a precaution. It is a mistake she would be making about a decent person, and her two treasures would eventually find out who had made it. Champagne does not care about being thought of as kind. She has said so, in those words. Being disliked by people you like is a different matter entirely. And then the thought that finished it. Absinthe is not a good man. Neither is she. If she measured him by her own standards rather than by anybody else's, some people simply want to protect the thing they do not have, precisely because they do not have it, and it does not matter that it exists in somebody else's life rather than their own, like her. She sat back on her heels. If Absinthe could be brought to an understanding on this one subject, he would not be a threat. He would be an enormous asset, because her angel is reassuring. Her cool guy is not. Her cool guy has a habit of following suspicious men into places without ever once assessing his own capacity to deal with what he finds, and he is currently a child who can be knocked flat by a middle-aged bank robber, and he is now attached to the organization's affairs. If he goes on tailing rum the way he has been, and he is discovered, then given the way this organization operates, and given what the compound is worth, he will not simply die. Everybody who has been near him will be cleaned up, and that list has her angel on it. Wait, maybe he has already stopped him, more than once. Rum is in Tokyo constantly, so is the cool guy. And from her own conversations, Rum and Absinthe have been at the same crime scenes on several occasions, and from the mailbox she had just spent 40 minutes in, Absinthe appears to run into the cool guy at crime scenes with a frequency that is not accidental. Her eyes moved, and her hand came down off my face. She sat on a hotel carpet for some time. Then she asked herself, with the particular irritation of a woman who has caught herself being slow when she had become so indecisive, and why she had spent the entire walk back refusing to consider the possibility that Absinthe might mean well, and had thought about nothing except how to remove him. Could it be, she thought, that she is jealous? That he gets to be accepted by both of them in the same situation and stand next to them in the open? She does not stay in that kind of thought for long. She is a practical woman. She built a plan instead. Establish, first, why Absinthe protects Ren Yamamoto, then act on the answer. And once she had a plan, she was calm again and reviewed the timing and found that her earlier panic about having no time was wrong. The only reason she had felt rushed was the fear that I would wake up and go straight for the boy, which stops being a problem entirely, provided I cannot get near him before she finishes. She looked at the suitcase. It was standing against the wall by the door. Large, hard shell on 4 wheels. She had bought it from a shop next to the hotel about an hour earlier. It had been for a body. 10 minutes later, she walked out of the front of that hotel dragging something heavy. At the entrance, there are 2 shallow steps. She did not bump it down them. She went several meters out of her way to the side ramp and took it down carefully and then set off at a light, pleased pace. 12 meters behind her, a small boy in a scarf put his head out of the hotel doorway and watched her go with a very complicated expression. Haruka Tanaka attracts attention, being nationally famous, so as soon as I was out of the room, I swapped puppets and followed as Xiaobai. Being in a suitcase is undignified. I did not mind, because she wanted to keep my body, which meant she wanted proximity, which meant contact time, which is the only currency that matters, and there was a further benefit. If she believes she has secured the main asset and controls the situation, her guard drops further, which reduces her resistance to a particular idea, which accelerates the entire process. The only real inconvenience was the diary. What if a serial murder walked into the office while I was in a suitcase? I thought about that on the walk and produced a solution. Her hesitation is caused by not knowing what Absinthe is, so her purpose in taking the body is to buy time to find out. Both my names have files inside the organization, and with her access, she can have anything she wants in an hour. The slow part is the outside. Whatever the organization considered unimportant and did not record will be in police files and hospital files, and she will have to go and get it in person. She has disguise. That is not going to take long. 1 day, 2 at most, which is inside the window Rum had already set for the Nakamura operation. Meanwhile, I could take the puppet out at night and check the office, and the permanent killing intent I was going to strip off her over those 2 days would more than cover the running costs. If the mailbox held nothing but advertisements, I would stay and keep working on her and finish the conversion permanently so that this never happened again. If something good came in, I would steal my own body back, do the job, and either return it or not bother. Because running back into captivity after a difficult escape is a suspicious act, and she would notice. That was the plan. There was one more thing. Rand might not notice anything wrong about those 2 phone calls for weeks. Watson absolutely would, and would start investigating within the hour, which was survivable. His opponent was Champagne, and Champagne was not going to kill him, but he would go to Dr. Tanaka for technical help because he always does, which meant Rin Asami would hear about it. And if Rin Asami went out looking and Champagne happened to see her, Champagne would be delighted because she has wanted Port dead for a long time and would consider it a gift. I imagined that for a moment. Then I had Xiaobai fly ahead on Miss Tengu because a puppet with no money cannot take a taxi, and I dropped a note through a window. New members of the organization are in this area and they are looking for you. Do not go out. Do not contact me for the next few days. And at the bottom, in heavier strokes, read this and burn it immediately. She has told me that she found the instruction archaic. She burned it, then she crushed the ash, then she washed the ash down the sink. Watson spent that night doing what Watson does, which is eliminating people he loves. His first suspect was his own mother, which I find genuinely touching. A prank that is terrifying and contains no actual malice is, in his experience, Akiko Yamamoto's entire artistic output, and she has a record. She also has the means. She knows about the shrinking. She has enough information to frighten him properly. And she could certainly borrow my phone and ask me not to speak until he had been sufficiently alarmed, because I rarely refuse a request, and because she is very good at producing a plausible reason, giving our son some experience, or he will be better prepared next time. If it was her, everything fitted. It was also, from where he was standing, by far the best available outcome. So he telephoned his father, hopefully, and probed, and Yusaku Yamamoto told him that both of them were in America. His father does not maintain a joke once it has been discovered. So that was the truth. And besides, whoever had been on that phone was a superb mimic. If the content had not been wrong, Watson would not have doubted it for a second. His mother is not that good. He put the phone down and looked at Dr. Tanaka. Have you ever given Li Wei a voice changer or sold one to anybody? Agasa has never sold one. He was careful about that from the start because his entire plan for the bow tie depended on nobody knowing such a thing existed. I've never sold one. I've always been very careful. Although you've had so few opportunities to use it, I always said the right moment would come, and look at the case with the young monk the other week. My double act worked perfectly. He got about 2 sentences of self-congratulation in before he remembered the question. I did give one to Li Wei. He said it was no good. It only produces a few fixed voices and can't imitate a person freely. I modified it 3 times and never improved it, so it's still in a drawer here somewhere. He rubbed his chin, genuinely regretful. It really needs to be combined with proper vocal imitation. Watson filed that and turned carefully to the girl who had come out of the kitchen and had said nothing at all. Does the organization have anybody who can change voices, or a machine that does it? Rin Asami stopped, because it did remind her of something. There are rumors about a woman in that organization who is a genius of disguise and impersonation, and the rumors are consistent, and everything else attached to those rumors is unpleasant. But if Ren Yamamoto's identity had genuinely reached that person, then everybody in Dr. Tanaka's house would have been collected or killed hours before Watson got home. That is how that woman works. She does not telephone people to unsettle them. Also, there was a paper aeroplane. It had come through the kitchen window earlier that evening and hit her on the side of the head. She did not see who threw it. It was in my handwriting, which meant that whatever had happened to me, I had been alive and mobile and thinking clearly sometime after I supposedly vanished. She did not tell Watson any of this. Her reasoning, which she explained to me later, was that if I had wanted Watson to know, I would have told him directly or asked her to pass it on, and the note said nothing about him, which she read as, "This does not concern Watson." So she looked at a spot on the wall for a moment and said, "Maybe," which is the same as not answering. Watson looked away from her, disappointed, and worked through his remaining categories, disguise and voice. He thought about Phantom Ace, who is world-class at both. But Ace has no motive. Ace and I have crossed paths a handful of times, and none of them ended in a way that produces a kidnapping. And beyond motive, there is no mechanism. Unless the Suzuki family produces a jewel and provokes him, there is no way to contact that man in a week, so the theory could not even be tested, and the kidnapper might not be anybody he had ever met, which left him with nothing at all, and a very silent household. Agasa, following the prank theory to its end, offered the following. Could it be Ran and Li Wei playing a joke on you? Or Ran found something and thinks you're Shinichi and asked Li Wei to help confirm it? Think about what you actually have. Ran and Yui told you they heard Ren Yamamoto call from Li Wei's phone, but you didn't hear that. The only thing you personally witnessed was Ran calling you from Li Wei's phone. Watson went very still. Then he made himself breathe. No. If that were it, your front door would already be off its hinges. He glanced involuntarily at the door he had locked from the inside. Rin Asami looked over as well and took a sip of tea and said calmly, "No, I'd let her in." Watson said, "There is nowhere left for him in this world. Even the warm refuge of the professor's living room has been occupied by a terrifying woman in black. Fortunately, the professor's theory was wrong, and Watson dismantled it weakly. Li Wei wouldn't be that careless, and even if he had let it slip, Ran wouldn't confirm it by borrowing his phone. That would make him feel he'd betrayed a friend. She'd come and ask me directly. He stopped in the middle of his own sentence. He sat with that for 2 seconds. Then, in order to protect his own morale and preserve his willingness to keep looking for me, he abandoned the entire method of reasoning from other people's feelings and went back to facts. The main problem is that they weren't in the same place. When Ran called from Li Wei's phone, there was no concert behind her. None. And when I reached the real Ran through Yui, I could hear the hall. So they really were at the concert. And Li Wei had a client that afternoon, and he stopped again. Because a client is a person, and a person has a name. He was on his feet with the phone out before he had finished the thought. If we can find out what that job was and who hired him, he said, scrolling, we can work out where he went afterward. Even if the client isn't behind it, the client knows something. Rinasami said, who are you calling? Hello, Kenji, it's Watson. Yes, Li Wei's neighbor. Rinasami came off her chair. She had been told once in a kitchen that Kenji Satomi is a member of the organization, and Watson Edogawa had just voluntarily telephoned him and started asking questions about my movements. She could not warn him. The call was live, so she stood 4 feet away and stared at the back of his head with an expression that had a genuine effect on his blood pressure, because he had just been exposed once and could not afford it twice. Also, she noted privately, the last time Yamamoto met Kenji Satomi, he called him Uncle Kenji in a sarcastic voice for an hour. Now that he wants something, it is Kenji. Shameless. Watson gave up nothing about Ren Yamamoto, because after a year of being lectured by Dr. Tanaka, he now believes that knowing about the shrinking is a death sentence, and that anybody who learns it is added to a list. So he asked obliquely about the day's work. It did not matter how obliquely. A 6-year-old neighbor ringing at 9 in the evening to ask about a man's professional calendar is a strange event, and Kenji Satomi's entire profession is strange events. He also had no idea what job I had taken, so he could not answer any of it, which left him free to work exclusively on the shape of the questions. You're asking me because you can't reach him yourself? He's nearly an adult. He took a job this afternoon, and by this evening you've decided he's missing. What happened in between? And how did you know he had a client at all? Did he tell someone specifically? Did you overhear it? Because if the answer to the last one was yes, then it meant I had known the job was dangerous and had left a marker with somebody I trusted. And in that case, he thought, with some heat, why was that person not him? He is considerably more reliable than a group of high school students. Did the boy think he was too busy? Watson, absorbing a 4-question volley, has told me that he suddenly understood, in a way he had not before, why the people he interrogates gradually stop being friendly. He hesitated. Then he remembered that some months earlier he had reported this same man to Inspector Matsumoto for carrying a firearm, and that Matsumoto had taken no action afterward, which meant the police had checked and found nothing, which meant the owner of that agency was, provisionally, trustworthy, and there were no other leads at all, so he gave up one detail. His classmate invited him to a concert this afternoon and he said he had a job on and couldn't come. I heard it by accident. And then this evening, and he described the calls, leaving out every trace of Ren Yamamoto, saying only that he had heard a second person's voice on my phone, and that that person could not possibly have been with me. I have this from my boss, months afterwards, in a car, delivered as a lesson about how children are raised these days. I have gone over this a great many times since, and I still cannot make it come out any other way. Kenji Satomi listened without saying anything and glanced at the receiver twice. The child was speaking in complete sentences with a clear evidentiary structure. He had identified the anomaly himself rather than being told. Any other first grader would have been fooled by a voice changer entirely and would never have suspected impersonation. Something about that is wrong. And then, thinking about unusual first graders, another one arrived in his mind. A small boy in a scarf at a hotel on the Izu Peninsula, who does not talk as much as this one, who is good at staging accidents, whose needlework is extremely accurate, and who had put Kenji Satomi on the floor by exploiting the fact that Kenji Satomi had looked at a child and relaxed. Compared with that, a first grader with good grammar is nothing. He decided he has simply been away from childhood too long, and that the flowers of the nation are growing stronger every year, and that the direction of that growth is a matter of some concern, particularly the one with the needles. Then he came back to the problem. And the problem was that a description of 2 phone calls does not tell you what somebody wants. Except voice changing. Champagne is called the thousand-faced witch, and by his intelligence, Champagne had entered the country quietly within the last fortnight. If it was her, she could do all of it. The difficulty was the motive. Why would a senior cadre who has just arrived in the country take an interest in a peripheral member with almost no connection to anything? Although, not no connection. Champagne dislikes Port. Part of her reason for coming to Tokyo is to hunt that defection down, and of Port's very small circle of people, one of the most obvious was me. He knew that because Rum had contacted me about exactly that when it happened. He had not expected her to circle back after so long. And Champagne has a documented habit of grinding down her own colleagues. Codenames have died on missions with her. A peripheral member is not going to register at all. If she was in a mood, she might remove me simply because I was standing nearby. Kenji Satomi began to frown. He hung up on Watson and rang me, and my phone was off, which it never is. Then he took out a different phone because a man with several jobs has several handsets. He does not have a current number for Champagne, but he knows she and Rum get on tolerably well, and he knows Rum holds certain personnel responsibilities and that anybody arriving in the country goes through him. He dialed without hesitating and with no visible remorse about using organization labor for his own purposes, the additional benefit being that this incident would add to Rum's workload, which improved his mood considerably, and the further benefit that under normal conditions, Scotch asking after Champagne's whereabouts for no reason is suspicious, whereas Scotch asking after Champagne because she has walked off with one of his own employees is entirely justified. The line rang a while. There was a sound of pages turning. What? Does that man ever stop working? Kenji Satomi relaxed slightly. Li Wei has gone missing. I think Champagne has him. Then, out of habit. You two have the same method for finding port, don't you? You can't locate her, so you take it out on people who have nothing to do with it. Is that because you have no idea where to start, and you're too embarrassed to sit still so you fill the hours with ineffective work to give yourself the impression of efficiency? Rum said coldly. Recovering port is the responsibility of every cadre in Tokyo, including the intelligence officer who has taken a very great deal of the organization's money and has yet to produce a single hair from her head. I don't believe you're qualified to make that criticism. I was not in that conversation. I have it because both men told me their own half of it, separately, each of them convinced he had won. I was watching the whole thing through a gap and biting the inside of my cheek. He sneered for a moment. Then he remembered that a substantial portion of the money in Scotch's pocket had been generated by his own work and stopped sneering immediately. He also noticed something useful, which is that from Scotch's tone, Absinthe was still an ordinary peripheral nobody of no consequence, which meant Absinthe had taken his advice about keeping the codename quiet. Rum remembers being mocked some years ago for having no eye for talent, and now the existence of Absinthe settles the question of whose eye is defective. It is a pity he is not finished yet. It is not time to tell Scotch. Rum has said that Scotch's loyalty is still an open question, and beyond that, nobody knows whether Scotch would abandon his principles and simply take the subordinate for himself once he understood what he had. A detective is convenient not only for quiet killings but for intelligence. In 2 years, there will be funding for an independent agency. Absinthe moves out. The connection to a short-sighted information broker ends. Wait, what did Scotch just say? Absinthe is out of contact? Rum brought his attention back to the actual sentence and concluded, on reflection, that it was not serious. Even if Champagne disliked Absinthe on Port's account, the worst she would do is sabotage him on a job. She does not abduct people. She has presumably become interested in him for some other reason. Still, taking somebody away without notice is not acceptable. So he ignored Scotch's request for a contact number, hung up on him, and rang her himself. Champagne spent that night reading my file, and part of it fending off Rum, and then she went out at dawn and started on everything the organization had not bothered to record. She has since described the experience of walking around Tokyo in heels for 11 hours, trying to establish that a colleague was a decent young man with a future, when shooting him would have taken 4 seconds. She also said that she went home, thought about it again, and decided that since the investigation had already started, she might as well finish it. Everything is difficult at the beginning. Once you have started, stopping feels worse. She got into a police station overnight and a hospital the next morning, wearing a doctor, and read a great deal. I spent that time running the household. I had the flat. I had the puppet. I went to the office twice, checked the mailbox, bought myself drinks and snacks from a convenience store 4 streets away, and slept in a bed considerably better than my own. There are no cameras in that apartment, so as far as she knew, I had been unconscious for 18 hours. She came in at noon on the second day, hung up her coat, unlocked the bedroom door, and looked at the bed. Then she looked at it again. Then she came and shook me. 18 hours. Nobody sleeps 18 hours off 6 cocktails. Unless he has never drunk before, and she had genuinely damaged him. She sat down on the edge of the bed with an expression she would deny having, and checked my pulse and my breathing and my pupils, and everything was fine. She hesitated. Then she pinched the philtrum, hard, with a nail. I could have kept going. I had every intention of keeping going, all the way to the memorial service if necessary. But if this continued, she was going to take me to a hospital, and also it genuinely hurt. I opened my eyes. For about 1/5 of a second, she looked relieved. Then the relief was gone, and she had her chin up and was saying, with a laugh, "Your sleeping act still needs work." I had several things I wanted to say, and none of them fitted the situation. So I did what a person does on waking, which is look around the room slowly, and then finally at her and say, "What do you want? Don't be nervous. We're only checking whether you've betrayed the organization." She said it without a flicker. Then she produced from somewhere a towel, a toothbrush, and a razor, dipped the towel in a basin, and started scrubbing my face with it. "You're awake. Wash first, then eat." I want to be clear that champagne is not good at looking after people. She scrubbed the way you scrub a saucepan. I got a hand up and turned my head and said, with as much dignity as was available, "I can do it myself." "That won't do." She sounded, if anything, pleased, and pressed me back down and carried on. "I hear you did well in combat training. I have no intention of wasting my afternoon fighting you. A lady solves problems with her mind, not her fists." Then she blew me a kiss. The technical arrangement was this: handcuffs, obviously. And, because she is thorough, both of my hands wrapped in bandages to restrict finger movement so that I could not dislocate a thumb and slip a cuff. That is a professional's precaution, and it works. And it also means that everything a person needs to do in a day now has to go through her. She had expected to find that unbearable. She has told me, with a straight face, that it turned out to be quite enjoyable, and that she now understands why some people have children. I was dragged through a wash and had just begun to relax when she put a tray down on the bedside table and settled into a posture that made it clear I would not be leaving the bed. I looked at that for a moment. A very bad feeling arrived. "I need the bathroom," I said, testing. She turned around and looked at me with the face of a woman who has been waiting for this. Then she put the tray down, reached under the bed like a professional carer, and produced a brand new kettle-shaped object. I said, "Are you out of your mind?" I was on the far side of that bed before she had finished extending her arm, at slightly more than twice the speed I had used to dodge the towel. She sat back, briefly startled. Then, she has told me, she was pleased, because she had refused to underestimate me on appearance and had kept a close watch, and had been correct to. And then she registered that the reason for the speed was revulsion, and was offended. She clicked her tongue. "I'm not embarrassed." "Why are you embarrassed? You've been in hospital. You must have used one before." No. He was not injured to the point of being unable to stand. I did not say that out loud. I looked at the window instead, and at the gap in the curtains, and at a strip of free sky. I had underestimated the floor of this organization. Up to that morning, I had believed that being held by champagne would be a matter of eating, sleeping, and quietly stripping her of killing intent. Now, this satisfies every criterion for social death. Abandon the plan to convert an ally in a single operation. Get out. Deal with it later, at leisure, from a distance. This woman is genuinely dangerous. She put the pot back under the bed with a sigh. He is so shy, she thought, and I have not even asked him to mix drinks yet. Then, because it was rare to see me animated, she got her phone out to record it as a keepsake. She had established that I was not moving and was staring out of the window, so she came closer to provide some motivation. And this time, before her hand reached anything, her ear caught a small, clean metallic sound. My hands came out from behind my back. I went for her throat, and she got most of the way out of it on reflex, so I hit her forearm instead. The whole arm went dead, and the phone came out of it and hit the wall and broke into several pieces. Then her collar tightened and she went into the air. She has told me that the moment of weightlessness told her exactly where she was, because she had watched it several times in the few precious pieces of footage that exist of absinthe working, and because it is my opening move. Put the person on the floor, then keep them there and work at leisure. That process, she noted while airborne, is scientifically sound. Once you are down in a fight, you have lost your advantages. She hit the floor beside the bed. She did not have time to wonder how the cuffs had come off. She used the momentum of the throw to protect her head and got straight back up. Before her vision settled, her wrist was taken and she was moved to the head of the bed, and there was a click. She turned around and found that the situation had reversed itself entirely. "You!" She stared at my hands, which were still wrapped in thick bandages and which could not possibly have picked a lock. And yet, under that gaze, I unwound the gauze from my own hand, held her still, and wrapped her cuffed right hand in exactly the same way, and finished it with a series of extremely ugly and extremely effective knots. Then I stepped back and looked down at her, and I am told I was smiling kindly. She jolted, very slightly. Then she smiled back, and kept smiling, and twisted her wrist behind her back where I could not see, pretending to be entirely unbothered. I looked at her for a moment, and then remembered something, and walked around the bed. Her expression changed at once, because her bag was on the floor over there, and in that bag there is a pistol, poison, and fishing line, which between them offer a large number of ways to produce a locked room or a natural death. She has read the case files Rum showed her. The smile finally went, because a genuine appreciation for somebody does not outrank the will to live. She dropped every pretense and began attacking the bandage on her right hand with her teeth, trying to get her fingers free enough to work the cuff. Her left hand is not as good as her right. The knots were fresh. The gauze was strong. It was going to take a while. She had got her head down to it when a shadow arrived in front of her. She stopped and looked up, and I was back. Her eyes went from my face down to my hand. I was holding a brand new kettle-shaped object. It looked familiar. She had been holding it herself about 40 seconds earlier. I stepped in and set it down beside her and said with real satisfaction, "You keep it," Champagne said. Her eye twitched. On one hand, she felt this called for anger. On the other hand, she could not entirely suppress a wave of relief and, worse, gratitude that I had not killed her, even though she knew perfectly well that the actual reason was that I did not want the paperwork. Once it was clear she was going to live, she leaned back against the bed frame and stopped resisting, and without the will to survive holding her face together, she found that even a young man taking petty revenge was, on balance, attractive and rather sweet. Having settled a great grievance, I stood there wondering whether to stay for another day and finish upgrading the relationship from colleagues to allies. Then I thought about it properly. She had already begun investigating. Even if I left immediately, Champagne is not a woman who abandons an investigation, and she would arrive at the correct answer on her own within the week. And the whole reason she had taken me home was uncertainty about whether Absinthe would kill Ren Yamamoto the moment he was free, which resolves itself permanently the instant she observes that Ren Yamamoto is still alive after I leave. Honestly, if the conditions of captivity had been better, I would have stayed. The apples were excellent, and I was collecting steadily. But if I stayed, I looked at the pot on the carpet and felt the floor plan of a 3-bedroom apartment assembling itself under my feet, and I have never in my life wanted to leave a building more. Champagne, a genius, and this is what she does with a hostage. I went to her bag and got my baton, wiped it on her clean handkerchief, and went through the rest until I had recovered the anesthetic and everything else. The phones were gone. I searched the bag twice, including the internal compartments, and then went through her pockets, which she endured while attempting to maintain her posture and tidy her own hair simultaneously. She worked out what I was after. "I threw them away," she said. "I'll buy you 2 new ones. What brand do you like? Who would use a phone from you? You may as well hand somebody a ghost." I did not answer. I picked up the pot she had kicked away and put it back within her reach, and then I left, under a gaze that was twitching slightly. I was not surprised about the phones. She had used them to call Hana Mizuki and Ren Yamamoto. Even having decided not to kill me, she was never going to leave those handsets in existence. I keep my contacts in my head. It was an inconvenience, not a loss. And on the stairs I realized it was not even an inconvenience, because a new number is a legitimate reason to send a mass message to every client I have, which puts my name in front of 200 people simultaneously, and one of those people might be sitting at a kitchen table at that exact moment with a problem they have not yet decided how to solve, and might remember that there is a detective, and might get in touch. I resolved to change my number periodically from then on. The connection fees are trivial, and the early termination charges are a rounding error, and converting money into ghosts is the entire business. Downstairs, I discovered I was in a district a long way from Baeka. Clean streets, old buildings with poor sound insulation. I had made a certain amount of noise up there. I hoped nobody would complain about her. I had gone about 80 meters when an engine came around the corner far too fast, and a white Mazda went past at a speed that made me step behind a tree before I had decided to. I did not get the plate. I got the model and the driving. That is Kenji Satomi's car. How is he here? Did Watson call him in? I sent Miss Tengu after it and doubled back on foot. He had, in fact, done it the long way. He had gone through the hotel's cameras the previous night. A hotel where he had, in order to reach the security office, knocked out a member of staff and worn his uniform, and where he had found Watson Edogawa already at the monitor room door and had used him to check how many people were inside, and had then discovered that the single guard in there was already unconscious with a very fine needle in the side of his neck. He had looked at that needle for some time. The footage showed my English teacher walking me into a lift. It then showed my English teacher leaving alone, returning with an extremely large suitcase, and leaving again with the suitcase noticeably heavier. The two of them had stood at that monitor watching a woman drag a large hard case out of a lift, and the temperature in the room had dropped. Then it went back up, because she was being careful with it. She took it round to the ramp. A corpse does not need a ramp. And then, a small figure crossed the corner of frame, and Kenji Satomi stopped the tape and wound it back, and there was a child in a scarf coming down from the same floor and following her out. He knocked the security guard out again, on general principle, and studied the image. That is the child who put a needle in my neck. That is also, in his private files, the prime suspect for the tire. Why is that child interested in Champagne? He got as far as noticing that Champagne and Kenji Satomi have 2 things in common, which is the organization and being conspicuously blonde. and then briefly wondered whether the child simply has strong feelings about foreigners, and then discarded that because if it is not appearance, then it is the organization, and if a 6-year-old is targeting the organization, then somebody's intelligence is very much better than it should be. He then declined to let Watson follow him, left him with Dr. Tanaka, and spent the whole of the next day working street cameras through a network of informants in fragments so that no single person ever saw the route, which is how he arrived outside that building about 11 minutes after I walked out of it. He went up carefully and found the exact opposite of what he had prepared for. No detective. Instead, champagne on the floor by the bed, clothes disarranged, one hand cuffed to the frame and wrapped in a mess of gauze, and in her free hand a small telephone she had kept hidden under her body during the search. He allowed himself a moment of hope, and before he could cross the room and beat her thoroughly and deliver the entire package to a police station, she looked up at him and said, into the phone, "No, it's Scotch." He checked the screen from where he stood. The call was live. He put the idea away with visible regret. He did not know what had happened in that room. What he knew was that if he had arrived 4 minutes earlier, he could have landed a very large fish, and that doing so would have made me a suspect and triggered an internal investigation, and, this is the part he found most galling, that if he had known Champagne was going to be dismantled by an 18-year-old, he would never have telephoned Rum the previous night, since Rum had contributed nothing and had received for free the information that Champagne and Li Wei were together. I was in the stairwell 1 floor down with a ghost in the room, and I would like to state that I enjoyed listening to this a great deal. He does not believe Rum caused this. Champagne matters far too much to Rum for him to leave her on a floor, which leaves one explanation. Why, he thought, did he not cuff the other hand as well, so that this menace to society could starve here, or at least take the phone, so that she could be collected quietly. Champagne hung up and looked at him with a certain wariness, because Scotch was not being friendly, and she had felt for a second something close to danger. Then she reasoned it out. Absinthe works part-time at Scotch's agency. Scotch, a loner in the same profession, has finally acquired a competent employee, and she had walked in and taken him. Whatever the employee's merits, going to a colleague's business and removing his staff is an injury to a certain kind of pride. His reaction was proportionate. She went back to picking at the knot with her left hand while maintaining, as far as possible, her posture. "You're too late," she said. He left. Then conversationally, "It isn't gentlemanly to stand and watch a lady in difficulty. Since you're here, would you unlock this?" Kenji Satomi did not move. He stood in the doorway for a moment and then said, "Have you ever had a flat tire?" Champagne said, "Is that a threat? Is it a hint? What does Scotch mean by tires?" In the stairwell on the same floor, listening through a ghost, I paused. I put the chain together immediately. He had checked the hotel cameras. He had seen Xiaobai and Champagne in the same frame, and from that, in about a day, he had connected a small child to a car tire. That is a terrifying instinct, given that the white car has never once been near his vehicle in front of him. I was briefly uncomfortable. Then I calmed down. What does a puppet's behavior have to do with my actual body? As everybody knows, even the Nakamura family's disguise work cannot turn an adult into a 6-year-old. So Xiaobai is Xiaobai, and I am me, and we are two entirely separate individuals, and Xiaobai is a mystical construct who can dissolve and reappear at will. Even if he bit a tire in front of Kenji Satomi, there is nothing to be done about it. Also, encouragingly, he has not connected the white car to me, he has connected the white car to tires. I settled back against the wall and kept listening. Unfortunately, Champagne and Kenji Satomi do not have a great deal to say to each other. He asked several questions, received nothing worth having, and walked out without unlocking her. I got deep into the stairwell before he passed, waited for his engine, and left quietly by a side door. I took a slightly indirect route, came out of an alley halfway across the district, and headed for the underground. I had gone 11 meters when I heard a car being driven the way that man drives, and it came up behind me and stopped at the curb. Kenji Satomi looked at me through the window and nodded. At that point, I should have opened the door and got in, and both of us should have left before the traffic police arrived. I did not move. I looked at the car. Then I looked at him, with what I hope was suspicion. He was briefly confused, and then understood, and I could see him understanding. Once bitten. Champagne's demonstration of what a face is worth had clearly made an impression, and now the boy suspects everybody, so he took hold of his own cheek and pulled. The skin moved the way skin moves and went slightly red, which is a thing no prosthetic does. "Get in. There's a patrol due." I got in and got a lift that was considerably faster than the underground. What happened? He already had most of it. He wanted my version. "I ran into Miss Harida," I said. "She's a bit unreliable, but she's a good person. We went and had a few drinks, and then..." Kenji Satomi listened to that, and something went wrong in his face. Because I am, in his assessment, quite a good judge of character, which means that in my judgment, a woman who runs into a student on the street and takes him to a bar and puts drinks in front of him is a good person. Well, Forcing is arguable. Champagne is capable of ordering things that do not taste like alcohol. But at minimum, this Miss Herida is a person who takes a minor into a bar, a cancer on society. He would have somebody look into her when time allowed. Having added an item to his schedule, he said, "And then, did she ask you anything?" I put my hand to my temple. About detectives, mostly. The gist of it, the person wearing Miss Herida's face said that Rum had used APTX 4869 on Ren Yamamoto, the high school detective who went missing, but that the compound is still experimental and isn't reliably lethal, and that Yamamoto's death was confirmed by Port, who has since defected, so the confirmation is worth nothing, so she suspects he isn't dead and that he's still in touch with me. Kenji Satomi listened very carefully and did not, at any point, connect a missing 17-year-old to the extremely articulate first grader who had telephoned him the previous night. Adults do not shrink. He is a man of science, so his mind went elsewhere, and the elsewhere was, this does not match. He had expected Port to be the subject. Port had been mentioned and then dropped. Why would Champagne care about a high school detective, unless she is building a case against Rum, because a failed assassination on a public figure is a very large mistake to have on file. And she had come to me because I am Ren Yamamoto's classmate and because of the newspaper story about possession, which, like a certain dark-skinned detective from the West, she may have read as meaning that my sudden competence is Ren Yamamoto directing me from hiding. That fits. It also raises a question genuinely worth answering, which is whether the boy is actually dead. He glanced across at me. You were his classmate and his neighbor. What do you think? Is he really dead? I was still doing my impression of a hangover, and I want to record that I was caught completely off guard. That direct? I had about a second and a half and I spent it eliminating the truth first, because Kenji Satomi does not know that I know he is Kenji Satomi. In his understanding, I believe he is Scotch, which means telling him Ren Yamamoto is alive is, from his side of the table, handing the organization a genuinely valuable piece of intelligence. I know he would never harm an uninvolved civilian, and I know that even if he identified Watson, he would not deliver him to a laboratory. He does not know that I know that. Which means that if I gave him the truth, I would be a young man casually selling out a classmate to a criminal organization, and everything I have built with him would go. Dealing in false names is exhausting. Every time we get to anything real, I have to run through 4 positions in sequence to work out which sentence protects the image and still gets me the case. I closed my eyes and said quietly, "He's probably dead," and left a long, visible pause in front of it. Because Watson reports crimes as Ren Yamamoto on the telephone, which means that if Kenji Satomi ever investigates properly, he will establish within a week that Ren Yamamoto is alive. And when he does, that pause will read as a boy caught between lying and telling the truth to a boss he does not want to lie to, which preserves something. He glanced sideways at me and did not push it, and privately moved find out about Ren Yamamoto to the top of a list. Then he changed the subject. That woman's code name is Champagne. If you follow the entertainment industry, you'll recognize her real one, Evelyn Blackwood. The actress. And then, remembering that I had been noticeably charitable about her. She's a specialist in disguise and voice work, and her character is vicious. A great many of the people who partner with her die for no apparent reason, and she is favored highly enough that she is never held to account for it. Members with code names have died on operations with her. A peripheral member would not even register. Do not be taken in by the packaging. I nodded. I also did not want a cadre from the red team noticing that my match with Champagne was going rather well, so, driven by an entirely inappropriate greed, I said, "I did think she was Miss Herida." He went quiet. After about 2 blocks, he said carefully, "In future, when you are out, do not accept drinks from strangers. It is common sense." And he registered, in the act of saying it, that this advice is almost exclusively given to girls, and that this constitutes a gap in public education, and that awareness campaigns should be inclusive and should not overlook a second vulnerable group. I considered whether my own common sense had just been called into question. Since I had in fact spent an evening drinking with somebody I barely knew, I could not challenge it directly, so I went round the side. The waiter brought them. A longer silence. In any case, don't go to bars. I don't normally. It seemed rude to refuse. Silence. Silence is a Mazda today. As we passed the office, I said I would get out there, and he found somewhere to stop and drove off, having remembered that I checked the mailbox obsessively. He had a busy afternoon ahead. In addition to his ordinary jobs, he had acquired several new lines of inquiry, when exactly Champagne and Rum had developed a new grievance, and the current status of a washed-up detective whose existence was, for the moment, a matter of opinion. I stood on the pavement and watched him go and let out a breath. I had checked the mailbox at 2 in the morning using a false name and did not need to check it again, but the atmosphere in that car had become difficult because he had gone from a serious intelligence question straight to the drinking, and I had not been ready for it, pretending to be unconscious and being carried off by an attractive woman. which, leaving her age out of it, she certainly is. On paper, that is an experience. From the outside, it is a completely different sentence. I wondered whether he had gone into the bedroom. I wondered whether those caregiving implements had been visible from the door. I sincerely hoped that Champagne possessed enough shame to have kicked them under the bed before he arrived. I pulled my coat closed, shuddered once, and walked into the office. The mailbox had, as usual, produced advertising. The volume of it has increased steadily with my reputation, and so has the ambition. The previous week, a man had made a formal appointment by post to come to my office and sell me a yacht. I read that appointment slip for several minutes and then accepted it. He sent a saleswoman. She was extremely capable. Over 90 minutes, I obtained her name, her maiden name, her husband's name, her father's name, the maiden name of her sister-in-law, and the names of 4 of her friends, and established conclusively that not one of them was connected to any case I had ever heard of. Then I declined the yacht, politely, and saw out a visibly disappointed professional who asked whether she might book a follow-up appointment and the one after that. I was thinking about how to make that process more efficient while I sorted the post, advertising into the box, newspapers to one side, appointment slips in a pile, and one envelope left on the table, Kato Yumi. I looked at the sender's name for a moment and then at the date and had a fairly good idea what was inside. It was a folded card, invitation to the memorial service for director Takeshi Hoshino, so it did come. As funeral invitations go, it was extremely late, which told me it had been slipped in by Mrs. Naito on her own initiative rather than issued by the family. Given the director's standing, and given that I am 18 and that a significant proportion of that world dislikes detectives on principle, there is no version of the official list with my name on it. I decided to try considerably harder the next time her cat left home. The night before the service, I sat in the sushi restaurant and got the plan. It is a simple one. At the memorial, there is a slide presentation. The hall lights go out. Away from the projector, the room is completely dark. Cognac brings Counselor Nakamura to stand under the chandelier and then puts one silenced round through the chain, which has been marked with fluorescent paint so that it can be found in the dark. A chandelier of that size coming down from that height does not require a second shot. And even if the police become suspicious, a high society gathering is an environment in which they are obstructed at every step, and it will close as an accident. Rum spent rather more of that briefing on a different subject, which was reminding me not to hunt at the party without permission. He was extremely clear about it. Because if a second person is murdered in that hall, the police stay longer and look harder, and if they then find something odd about the counselor's death, they acquire a legitimate reason to hold every guest in the building and pursue the other killing, which complicates everything. I agreed, with rather less confidence than I displayed, because I have never developed a reliable sense of the base rate of homicide in this city. If something happened, I would simply have to maintain that it was an accident and had nothing to do with absinthe. Cognac was not at that meeting. Rum had arranged the timings so that we would not meet. I was mildly disappointed. I had wanted to look at the box before opening it. They gave out souvenirs at the door. A good picture book of the director's work, and folded on top of it, a handkerchief. Fine cloth, embroidered corner. One of the 7 colors of the rainbow, because his most famous film is called The Rainbow Handkerchief. At the end of the evening, guests holding one particular color would be invited to say a few words. Mine was purple. I put it away and went in and started counting. There were not many purples. In the version I remember, 2 people at that party drew purple, Cognac, and Champagne. Does this organization have a 100% hit rate on purple? Cognac was already there, standing somewhere unremarkable, looking up at the ceiling and adjusting his position by half a meter at a time. Champagne was not disguised, not nearby. My ghosts were all watching Cognac, which they would not have been if there had been anything better in the building, and Cognac's killing intent was good but ordinary. I sent her an email. She wrote back inside a minute. "You want me there? Come and beg me, and I'll consider it." There was a photograph attached of a soft double bed I had spent a night and most of a day in. I looked at that for a second, then I dragged it to the bin and emptied the bin and walked over to the long table and picked up a glass of grape juice. The phone went again while I was drinking it. Didn't I tell you in the car that the FBI watch my public identity? Turning up as her would only bring a pack of hyenas. That was not what I remembered. I had not expected the pressure on her to be that heavy. Was she avoiding it because absinthe was now available as support, or had it genuinely got worse? And if it had got worse, was that something I had done without meaning to? I had certainly intended to sell a small portion of champagne to the FBI at some point. I had not done anything about it yet, on the grounds that it might disturb the Cognac acquisition. I thought about it for a while and got nowhere, and then dropped it, because what does a war between the FBI and Champagne have to do with me? I am an unlucky high school student who keeps finding bodies. Also, they have very little purchase on me. On the negative side, they cannot make an arrest in this country. To avoid deportation, they have to stay out of the way of the police and leave quickly, exactly like every other criminal. Which means that in the very worst case, absinthe exposed, the FBI moving, I call the police. If Daiki Ito's people surround my house, I walk a puppet out of a window and telephone them, and the encirclement gets encircled. That is the enormous pleasure of being local. And in reality, my body is not easy to take. Puppet clay is a wonderful material, short of Ito putting a tranquilizer round into me from 400 meters, which would be extremely poor sportsmanship. Everything is survivable, and even then I could simply build a puppet and walk my own body out at leisure. On the positive side, that group barely kills anybody. I have never met them, but I would guess they are a collection of people with no killing intent, no ghosts, and a genuinely worrying inability to attract a murder. Daiki Ito's rate is not even as good as Alice's, although introducing Daiki Ito to Kenji Satomi might develop a mass production capability in my boss. Kenji Satomi produces almost nothing, and what he does produce evaporates before I can reach it. But my ghosts are far more sensitive than I am, and from the way the mermaid looks at that man every single time she sees him, the quality must be exceptional, and by the same logic, putting Daiki Ito inside Rum's field of view ought to produce a comparable effect. I stood in a memorial hall imagining a very bright future, then another email arrived. She does not send things in one piece, she sends them as they occur to her. I hear this is your first time watching somebody that senior being removed. Don't take it too seriously, just enjoy the show. If it goes wrong, do not expose yourself. We work on personal responsibility here. Whoever makes the error carries it. You are not the executor tonight, so as long as the situation doesn't deteriorate, nothing lands on you. Champagne was being, I have to say, unexpectedly kind. When the first reply came in, I had been entirely certain that if I actually went and lay down on that bed, she would say she had only agreed to consider it, laugh, and block the number. Instead, she explained her reasoning and provided a guide to slacking off. Was this because I had not killed her when I left? Also, absinthe had been out of her hands for days, and Ren Yamamoto was demonstrably still alive, which was doing most of the work. But the largest single contributor, obviously, is a pair of small round ghosts. Honestly, how old is that woman? The aura should not move somebody at that speed. I put the phone away. She was not coming, and she was not going to come in a face either, because the door had a list and a name check, and knocking out a guest to take their place would introduce exactly the kind of irregularity the organization was trying to avoid, which meant I would have to provide Cognac with a certain amount of support. After all, colleagues are colleagues. You cover, so that later on you can be covered. There was no hurry though. It was much too early for him to move, so I got out my business cards. The mathematics of a business card is simple. Every card is a person who, on some future afternoon, will have a problem and will need somebody and will either find my card in a drawer or, failing that, will remember the young man who gave them one. A significant proportion of that room dislikes detectives, but they are all extremely well brought up, so nobody was going to tear a card in half and throw it on the floor and tell me to get out. Which was a shame, because in my experience, in this world, a person who does that has an unusually high probability of being murdered inside a fortnight. I went round the entire hall. I memorized every face. I gave out everything I had brought. The good news was that I collected a great many cards in return, including several names I recognized. The bad news was that not one person had insulted me. No death flag had appeared anywhere. I exchanged cards with Cognac somewhere in the middle of it. He took mine with the mild distaste of a rich man being handed something by a tradesman and gave me his without looking at me properly, and I confirmed from that alone that he had not been told who I was, which was ideal. Because if the operation went wrong and he decided to take a colleague down with him, I did not want to be a name in his mouth. Then, as the lights were being adjusted, two things happened that were not in my version of the evening. The first is that Rin Asami came in, not alone. The second is that Cognac checked his phone and began, very carefully, to look at me. I got the explanation about 90 seconds later, when the mermaid came back from hovering next to him and reported the contents of his inbox. Rum had written to him, "There is a high school detective at the memorial called Li Wei. Port may attempt to approach him or watch him from nearby. Use that to find her." Because Rin Asami had left a hair in Rum's car that afternoon, which is a whole separate disaster that I only assembled later, and which runs like this. Rin Asami, bored, homebound, watching a celebrity street broadcast, had seen a black Porsche 356A go past a camera. Her whole face had gone. Then she had remembered that she was several kilometers away and had relaxed, and then had remembered that I was at a memorial service at the Beihou City Hotel that evening, which is not far from that street. And she had said out loud, mostly to herself, "That's the same model as Rum's." Watson was in the room. He was gone in under 4 seconds, with a skateboard and a length of wire. She went after him with Dr. Tanaka because a car of that model is rare enough to be diagnostic, and because if Watson tracked it down, he might walk into my dealings with the organization or make contact with me in front of a man who had personally dosed him at close range. Agasa drives lawfully and was caught at a light. By the time they arrived, Watson had the door of a black Porsche open and his head inside it. She hauled him out by the collar, and across the road, Rum and Stout appeared, walking back toward the car. The two of them got out of there in a state that did not permit tidiness, and one reddish-brown hair stayed behind on the seat. Then Watson's bug picked up a conversation about a compound she built, and she could not make herself stay at home. That is the honest reason she was in that hall. She has told me the other one as well, which is that she could not find a legitimate way to stop Watson going, and reasoned that if she went, Watson's protective instinct would fix on her and keep him away from me. I had none of this at the time. I put it together afterwards, out of what my boss told me, and what she told me, and what a very tired professor let slip. Rum, meanwhile, had found the bug, destroyed it, gone over the car with a lint roller, and found the hair. It is cold, he thought. It is the season when human beings shed. Today is her death day. Stout, running the roller, asked whether she would really come, which is one of the duties of a senior subordinate. When the leader has made a brilliant decision, ask the question that lets him explain it. Of course, she is not capable of doing nothing about this. Rum lit a cigarette. And if she doesn't come, we now know she is hiding near Baca, which narrows the search considerably. Then Stout had an idea of his own. Boss, didn't Port look after Absinthe because of that accident a year ago? She likes rescuing people. Why not use Absinthe as a hostage and draw her out directly? Put a gun to Absinthe's head. Shout that we will kill him. And then, he thought privately, perhaps the gun goes off. Rum's first reaction was that it was crude. His second was that there was something in it. Port is cold on the surface and soft underneath, and carries a kind of naivety that nobody else in that organization has, and a trap that obvious might be beneath other people's dignity and still work on her. He filed it as a contingency. Then he drafted an email to me. Port may be here. If she contacts you, find a way to bring her to me. You should be able to recognize her. If that isn't possible, shoot her where she stands. And then, with his thumb over the send key, he stopped. Because Absinthe is extremely proactive about that particular category of assignment, he would not wait to be approached. He would go looking. And Port, before approaching anybody, watches. If she watched Absinthe and Absinthe was hunting, she would feel it. And she is genuinely frightened and genuinely careful and would be gone. So he deleted my address and sent it to Cognac instead, with instructions to observe. An outsider's eye is clearer. There are angles I cannot see from where I am standing, and Cognac could see them from across a room without drawing any attention at all. I did not know he had that email until my mermaid came back and told me what was on his screen, and by then he had been staring at me for a full minute. Cognac read it and misunderstood every part of it. A defector from the organization and a righteous young detective, opposite sides, close in age, apparently in contact. Which reminded him of a novel he had once picked up from Stout about a high school boy who acquires a handsome villain from nowhere and settles into a life of bickering domesticity with him. Does that actually happen? A 71-year-old took a drink and shook his head and thought, young people today will take anything. And then professionally, if this detective is in contact with Port, he cannot simply be left. He wrote back, how is the detective to be handled? Rum's reply came in 30 seconds. Don't provoke him. Concentrate on Port. Cognac looked at the word provoke for some time. There was something in it, as though, next to an immature high school student, a veteran of the organization was the weaker party. Is this detective genuinely that dangerous? I had by then sent Miss Tengu up over the crowd and located both children on the far side of the room and had reached the following position. If Rinasami was in the building, Watson was in the building, which meant the blind box had a chance of being an excellent one. And Rum, having been told that Port was here, was going to arrive with his killing intent already high and would then spend an unknown period of time failing to catch her in the cold and would come away considerably higher. I touched the ghost mint in my pocket. Then I went and found a dim corner and leaned on the wall, and Shikigami came up through the plaster into an empty corridor and stacked themselves, and about a minute later, Anonymous smoothed her skirt down, pulled her hat brim low, and left at a fast walk. There was one job I had not been able to delegate. In the version I remember, the reason Cognac is caught is a photograph. At the exact moment he raises the gun in the dark, a reporter 40 meters away is photographing a couple who have taken advantage of the darkness, and in the background of that photograph, perfectly framed, is a man aiming at a ceiling. Which is a coincidence stacked 4 deep. If the reporter finds no gossip, if he presses the shutter a second early or late, if the angle is 11 degrees different, any one of those and Cognac walks away, and then there is no reason for Rum to remove him, and there is no ghost, and there is also no ghost from the man who would have replaced him. That is not one blind box. That is a set of two. So I put Anonymous under a round table with a borrowed camera in case the press failed me. When the lights went out, I lifted the tablecloth and looked. The puppet has the ghost fetus night vision, so the room was perfectly legible. And about 4 meters away, 2 guests had taken the opportunity of total darkness to embrace, and a man with a press badge had already raised a camera. I had not needed to do anything at all. Counselor Nakamura, following his instructions, arrived under the chandelier looking mildly confused about why. Behind him, Cognac raised a silenced pistol and draped a purple handkerchief over the muzzle to kill the flash. I estimated the angle from where the reporter was standing and found it excellent. So, half a second before the shutter, I let the puppet go and came back to my own body, which was standing next to Inspector Matsumoto at the other end of the hall. The flash went off. The host laughed into the microphone and said that everyone clearly loved the director's collection, but that flash photography would ruin the slides, and the room laughed with him. Cognac's ears moved. He registered a commotion at the front of the hall, decided from the host's remark that a camera was pointed at the wall rather than at him, and went back to work. He put 1 round through the chain. 2 sounds arrived almost together, the shot and the chain letting go. He gave a small, silent laugh and put the gun away. I want to describe the next 4 seconds from Watson's position, because I have it from him. He was moving toward the counselor in the dark, from memory of where everybody had been standing, and he heard the 2 sounds and could not place either of them. Then something above him began to fall, and the sound it made on arrival was glass and twisting metal and, underneath both, a noise that goes into your teeth. He worked out what it was on the way down. I hope it hasn't hit anybody. Before the lights came up, something drifted down out of the dark and landed on Watson Edogawa's head, a purple handkerchief smelling of gunpowder. He was still holding it, puzzled, when the lights came on from every direction and he had to shut his eyes. The chandelier was on the floor and there was a man under it. I looked away from that and at Cognac's leg, where a shikigami had come out from under the wreckage, crossed the room through 40 pairs of ankles with a great deal of resentment and attached itself to him. There it is. Then I turned to the man beside me. Matsumoto got his badge out and announced himself and told the room to stay where it was, and officers came out of the crowd, and Officer Suzuki crouched down and put 2 fingers against a neck and said quietly that there was nothing. Matsumoto started toward the body and then remembered and turned back to find his young colleague. I was standing exactly where I had been, looking at the chandelier with the mild alarm of a member of the public. When I noticed him watching, I looked blank for a moment and then, as though remembering my profession, moved to join him. He looked at my feet. Then he put a hand up and stopped me, because 11 minutes earlier he had come over to say hello and had said, "Why do you smell of wine? You're not old enough to drink." And I had slid a glass onto the table behind me and covered it with my shoe and said, "I didn't know it was wine." I had taken 2 mouthfuls and put a little on my cuff about 90 seconds before that, for exactly this purpose, because Matsumoto was always going to find me and ask me what I thought, and a detective who cannot produce anything for an entire evening looks wrong, whereas a detective who has done something stupid is simply a teenager. I could not solve that case. Cognac is a colleague. He can be removed by the organization for an error, but he is not going to be removed to improve a junior's numbers. He draws a salary and a killing intent from the same people I do, and there ought to be a minimum of professional courtesy. Matsumoto looked at my slightly unreliable footing and decided that a young man in that condition should not be walking on broken glass, and that he did not want to have to call an ambulance in the middle of a homicide. Then he decided that once I had sobered up, somebody strict would be taking me to a police station for a conversation about the law. His eye went to Officer Suzuki, and he nodded to himself, having first eliminated one candidate, which was a man who has become far too accustomed to accepting the phrase "next time is fine." The guests fought the police for about 40 minutes and won, as they always do. Nobody in that room wanted to be in a report. Every single one of them insisted it was an accident. And in the middle of it, Rin Asami looked across the hall and found me looking back. She went white and pulled her hat down and turned away. She has told me what that was. I had told her to stay indoors. She had come out and had come to a place I was working and had come specifically to obstruct an operation that she suspected was mine. She told me that in my own kitchen, weeks later, looking at a saucepan, and I did not know what to say to it, and so I said nothing. She said it felt like being the snake in the story, picked up out of the snow, carried inside somebody's coat, warmed through, and then biting. She had reasons. She thought the reasons were poor. She elbowed Watson and started steering him toward the doors. Watson did not want to leave, but he had a new idea, which was the register at the front desk, and the list of everybody who had been given a purple handkerchief. They got out through the doors and into a corridor packed with reporters, and Rin Asami turned her face away from the flashes and turned it, unfortunately, back toward the hall. Cognac was watching the door. He got about a second and a half of a small girl's profile and a few strands of hair under a hat brim. He knew the Tanaka parents. He met their younger daughter when she was small. He opened a laptop, typed a word, and looked at the file photograph on the screen and then back at the memory of the face, and began, very quietly, to move toward the door. Watson reached the desk and asked the staff, sweetly, about a lost handkerchief. They brought the register. 7 people were still in the building holding purple. He read the page and stopped, because my name was on it. I was 4 meters away with my back to both of them, and I heard every word of it through a ghost sitting on a light fitting. I did not see this. I have it from somebody who did, and who has no reason to improve it. I had my hand in my pocket on a baton, and I did not take it out, and I have thought about my reasons since. Rina Sami read it over his shoulder, and her fingers went cold in her pocket, and she said, as steadily as she could, "Why do you want to know that?" He was about to explain when the corridor erupted because the police had given up and the guests were coming out all at once. She was nearly walked over twice. When she got her balance back, there was nobody around her that she knew, and then an elderly man passing behind her bent down, put an arm under her, lifted her, and pressed a folded handkerchief over her face. She got about a quarter of a breath. Cognac carried her into a service corridor, changed into a cleaner's uniform, put her in a cardboard box on a cleaning trolley, and wheeled her down into the old wing, to the wine cellar. That cellar was the organization's second option. If the counselor had failed to stand under the chandelier, he was going to be moved down there in that trolley and dealt with slowly. It came in useful after all. He tipped her onto the floor, took the uniform off, opened the laptop, and started composing a message to Rum, and then he stopped, because on his way in, he had seen the detective still standing in the corner of the hall, alone, apparently thinking and not leaving. Everything was chaos. It was a rare opportunity. Why not bring him down as well and deal with both? The boy looked like a well-brought-up student who would not refuse an old man, and he was drunk. He could not imagine why Rum was being so cautious, but there was no harm in trying. He hurried back up, worried that if he was slow, the second item would leave. After the sound of his shoes had gone, somebody came to the locked cellar door and put a hand on it. The lock turned with a soft click. Anonymous stepped in and locked it again behind her with a key of hardened white clay, and dropped the improvised tools on the floor. Then she went to the cardboard box under the folded uniform and put something into it. Then she found a gap between 2 shelves at the back of the cellar, put the puppet in it, and left it running. Upstairs, I opened my eyes. I had been facing the window for some time, apparently lost in thought, which is a very efficient way to do nothing in a room full of police. I was about to go out into the corridor, and in the black mirror of the window, I watched a familiar figure come up behind me. Our eyes met in the glass, and Cognac produced the smile of a kindly old man. I turned around and looked puzzled. He let his shoulders come down as he came, which made him older and less substantial, and glanced sideways to confirm that nobody was paying attention. "Young man, do you know where the changing rooms are in this hotel? My granddaughter spilled wine on her dress and went to change, and she hasn't come back." I looked him over. For a man who had killed somebody 11 minutes earlier, he had already built up a respectable amount of it again. I nodded at once and produced a smile I have been copying off Hana Mizuki for a year. "Don't worry, this is a very safe building. Nothing will have happened. I know where they are. Come with me." And I took him out through the side door into the empty part of the corridor. I want to lay out my reasoning, because otherwise the next 4 minutes look like an indulgence. I cannot attack a colleague without cause, but if a colleague attacks me first, then defending myself is entirely reasonable, and hitting him several times in the process is a natural consequence of surprise. And after those first few, a careful member of this organization ought to reason as follows. If a teammate assaults you without warning in a building full of police officers, that teammate may be an informant or a defector attempting to have you arrested, in which case dragging him somewhere quiet and asking him a number of questions is not merely permitted, it is procedure. We went down the corridor and around a bend to an empty changing room. I knocked politely and waited for his granddaughter to open the door herself. Cognac listened to footsteps somewhere else in the building and said, with a grandfather's anxiety, "Let's go in and look." A man who will not open his own granddaughter's door but sends a strange young man in ahead of him is, on inspection, slightly inconsistent. Given the quality of what he was wearing, I let it pass. I turned the handle and went in. He watched a naive young man walk into a room ahead of an elderly stranger, and something cold and pleased moved across his face, and he straightened up to his full height and put a hand into the back of my neck. The reality diverged from his script at that point. I moved about 15 centimeters and his hand went past, and on the way past I took hold of his collar from behind. He had a moment, and then he went up and over in the same arc as every criminal before him and hit the floor with the same sound and produced the same noise. To his credit, unlike most of them, he has had training, and he got his arms up and did not black out. Within about 6 seconds, he had begun to suspect that not blacking out was a disadvantage. He looked out from under his arm and watched me lock the door from the inside and take a completely black baton out from somewhere. He said, because he had checked my file that evening, No karate, no judo, no competition record of any kind. A thinker, not a fighter, which fits the face. A person like that, attacked from behind, goes down. Bang. Cognac has since described the following 4 minutes as the point at which his understanding of the world changed. He rolled, he tried to get up, and the baton kept arriving faster than he could plan around. And somewhere in there, the confusion turned into anger, and the anger turned into something colder. Am I going to die here? Like this, absurdly. Drunk men do not control their strength. Deaths in drunken fights are not rare. And it was at that moment that he finally understood Rum's email, and immediately resented it. Because if Rum had written he is violent, do not go near him, instead of don't provoke him, Cognac would have used the pistol he is legally entitled to carry, and which was in his jacket. He got his hand moving toward it, and somebody knocked on the door. Leeway? The baton stopped in the air. Cognac heard me click my tongue, quietly, in disappointment. The pause gave him a breath, and he used it. Help, help me. I crouched and closed his mouth with one hand, and I am told the movement had an unnerving amount of practice in it. Cognac's mind produced, at speed, every case he had ever heard of in which a person calling for help was suffocated by an assailant in a panic. That did not happen. Instead, I hauled him up onto his feet, slapped the marks off the back of his coat, folded the baton away into my pocket, and went and opened the door. Officer Suzuki? She did not answer immediately. She put her head slightly to one side and looked past my shoulder into the room. There was an elderly man in there, white-haired, slightly bent, with his face doing something complicated. She had followed us. She had listened at the door for a while and had not been able to work out what she was hearing, because that hotel is well built. Now she looked at the old man and reached a conclusion, which is that Li Wei is hitting somebody again behind the backs of the police, which is illegal, and which in her experience he has never once done to somebody who did not turn out to be extremely dangerous, which raised the possibility that I had already found the man who killed the counselor. Her eyes narrowed. And then Cognac stood up straight without visible difficulty, and she hesitated. Because that is not what they look like. They have to be carried out, or they run at the police in tears. This one was standing. Had there simply not been time? Or had she got it wrong? What's going on here? I straightened my cuff. This gentleman asked me where the changing rooms were. I brought him along to look. She glanced at Cognac's expression, which was not a good advertisement for that sentence, and leaned in and said quietly, "You didn't hit him?" I made a small affirmative noise and looked at her with an expression of total incomprehension. She suspected me of performing. Then she looked more carefully, and I appeared entirely innocent, and she could not tell, which is a state I have worked hard for. Cognac got up. She turned to him, slightly nervous. "Are you all right?" Cognac wanted, more than he has wanted anything in some years, to beat me to death. He produced a stiff smile and said, "It's nothing." I asked him for directions. Because he had worked out that the woman in the doorway was police, and had assumed that I had sobered up and was covering. Under any other circumstances, he would have handed me in on the spot. But identifying me as his assailant means that a man of 71 goes to a hospital with an escort, and there was a 6-year-old in a locked cellar who could not wait. Suzuki was visibly thrown because the two accounts matched. "Are you sure you're all right?" He nodded with reserve, and the movement went through his back several times, and his eye twitched, and he suppressed it and moved to walk around her. She put an arm out. "Then would you come with me for a moment? We need your cooperation with an inquiry." Cognac said. She had crossed the hall diagonally to follow us, and had taken the wrong turning at the bend, which is why she was late. Both purple handkerchiefs went into a communal room and stayed there. They were not permitted to use a telephone. Cognac sat with his hands on his knees and thought about a cellar and told himself it was fine. The door was locked. The only other opening is a chimney about a meter across, which an adult could just about brace himself up, and which is impossible for a child. And his laptop was down there with a transmitter in it, so when he failed to report, Rum would locate it and go and look, or the other member would. The unknown one who was supposed to provide support and had, all evening, been entirely invisible. A parasite, thought Cognac. He looked at me twice. Matsumoto detained the 7 names because Ren Yamamoto had telephoned and told him to. I have to give him this much. He was right about the list, and he was one name away from being right about everything. Watson had put that call in the moment he could not find her, using a bow tie, having concluded that if the organization had taken Rin Asami, the person who had done it was on that list. He gave the police a version with the shrinking removed. And then, having got 7 people into a room, Matsumoto discovered that Ren Yamamoto had no further ideas and no evidence, and that 7 wealthy people cannot be held indefinitely on the strength of a color. He came over to me, he told me the whole thing quietly, and finished with, "If one of these 6 looks wrong to you, don't say it out loud. Tell me privately." Because the people in that room were at minimum senior figures in their industries. If the deduction was wrong, it would offend a great many people. If it was right, it would offend considerably more. And if it was right and there was no evidence, then in his experience, the young man who said it out loud would shortly die of something unrelated. I nodded since I had already prepared an excuse for not solving anything and could simply agree with whatever he said. Then I went back to the window. From that window you can see most of the road, which made it a convenient place to decide when to go down to the cellar. She woke up on a stone floor. She was groggy, and she lay there looking at a ceiling much higher than a room's ceiling and then at an old chandelier hanging from it, and the whole evening arrived at once. She sat up. A large room with old walls, wooden paneling round the edges, and racks of bottles in the middle. There was a small sound in her pocket. It was a detective boy's badge, and it was calling her name. She had grabbed the wrong coat on the way out of the house. Watson had not had time to put his on at all, which is why, after she vanished, he first tried to find me in the crowd, and could not reach my phone, and then went back to Dr. Tanaka in the car and asked him to try the badges. It worked. Barely. The signal was failing, and the position was drifting somewhere in the region of the hotel, and the battery was going. Down in the cellar, she picked it up and answered a few questions and described what she could see. Then she got up and went to the door and turned the handle. Locked. She stood there for a moment with the light going out of her face. Then she said, into the badge, "The drug data and everything I know about the organization are in a hidden folder. The professor has the password. After they take my body, use it. Try to work out the antidote. And, after tonight, more people will know it can shrink an adult. You won't be able to be careless anymore. Keep your head down. Don't drag Li Wei and the professor into it. And, that's everything. You can go now. Don't contact me again." Watson's voice came back through the interference, and he did the only thing available to him, which was to argue. "It's not over yet. Li Wei is in this building tonight. If he finds out you died a floor away from him, he'll start investigating it seriously. And with what he can do, it will not take him long to find the organization, and the further he goes, the worse it gets. Even if you don't care about yourself, for his sake you can't just die here." I could not hear his half of it. I could hear hers, and I could see her face, and that was enough for me to know exactly which way this was going to go. My ghosts brought me this one about 90 seconds after it happened. I have my own memory of that minute, and it does not match his, and I have decided that mine is the one I am keeping. Rinasami said, "Wane cheese." The first half of that went straight into her. The second half gave her a great deal to say and no time to say it. Because every time she hears Watson Edogawa announce that he is going to find the men in black, while I walk past him twice a day, she feels that the name Ren Yamamoto is somewhat misleading. I had a ghost lying flat on the top shelf of that wine rack for every second of this, and I want to be straight with you about what I did with the next 4 minutes, because what I did was watch. I have the rest of it from her afterwards, in her own words, over a kitchen table, and I have put it back where it belongs. But the first half had done its work, and it had opened a door onto something worse than dying. If the organization takes her back, they will not simply kill her. They will find out where she has been living, and who fed her, and who hid her, and they have several methods, and one of them is chemical, and she has been in that building. She knows what those methods do. She stood in a cellar and saw Baker Street with the lights off, and people she knows on the pavement, and herself in the middle of it. I could have opened that door at any point in the previous 6 minutes. I want that on the record, because I did not, and because I knew exactly what I was buying with the delay. 2 options, die now, or leave alive. She turned her head and looked at the corner of a table, which was sharp. Then she turned and looked at the chimney. Then she looked at the table again. On the top shelf of the wine rack, lying flat on a sheet of spread puppet clay, Haruka Tanaka was watching her sister look at a table corner and rubbing the edge of a translucent sleeve between 2 fingers and preparing to come down. The chimney is impossible for a child. It is not impossible for an adult. This is the moment I had been building toward for 4 months, and I had put it in her pocket myself through a window at 1 in the morning, and I had never once been sure she would use it. She got the small box out of an inside pocket and held it until it was warm, and then poured out a red and white capsule and swallowed it dry. It is one of several she has made. Different durations, different side effects. She chose the shortest and mildest, because after she was up and out, she wanted to be small again as fast as possible. And there was a cleaner's uniform on a cardboard box by the door, which she had been quietly aware of for some time, and which she now went to get, because none of her own clothes were going to fit in 90 seconds. I had put that there 11 minutes earlier, and then spent the whole 11 minutes hoping she would look in the box. I was standing 4 feet away with my hands in my pockets. I want to be honest with you about my own part in this, because I was not helping, and I had no intention of helping. She pulled the uniform off the box, and something heavy inside shifted and clicked. She went up on her toes and looked in. There was a bulletproof vest in the bottom of that box, and lying on top of the vest was a sheet of paper with a mark printed on it, an ornate letter Z, intricate and simple at the same time. She has seen that mark twice, on the neck of a small boy who once pulled her out from under a tarpaulin, and under the right eye of a woman in black. She stood there with a heating body and a fraying mind and tried to make it fit. Not the abductor. The hand that lifted her was old and dry, and by Watson's account, the Anonymous are all people the compound has shrunk, and none of them could look like that. And if the Anonymous had wanted her, they had known where she was for months, which left one shape. They know she can grow. They know about the chimney. They cannot, for some reason, simply walk in and take her out. So they have left her the equipment, which is a test, and tests of that kind exist to be passed, and passing them gets you accepted. That thought went into her like a match into dry grass, and it lit up the whole of a future she had not been able to see. Because Cognac might not be caught, and even in a cell he can get a message out. And the organization has photographs of Port at every age, and the moment they learn that she is small, there is no version of the rest of her life that is not being hunted, and one morning a group of extremely patient people will find Dr. Tanaka's front door, whereas the Anonymous have never once shown any fear of the black organization. Their intelligence is frankly alarming. They knew about the compound. They knew its reversal condition. They walked past a laptop full of the organization's secrets as though it were a piece of rotten wood, because they already have all of it, which means there is a mole, and the mole is senior. And their methods are gentler. They have known where she lives all this time and have done nothing to her. They may even have considered her feelings, which would explain why they only ever send people she cannot be frightened of. She got hotter and her thoughts got faster, and she began, without noticing, to assess her own suitability. She is a research scientist. She has an unmatched knowledge of the compound and everything around it. As for the other criterion, she thought about her own face in a mirror and concluded, with a certain embarrassment, that she probably meets the standard. She has lived her entire life believing she was employed for her mind, and it appeared that in the end she was going to be admitted on her appearance. Then she corrected herself. Presumably, they also assessed the will to survive, which would explain why nobody had come to carry her out and why she had been left a vest instead. If she does this well, will they take her? She got the vest on over the uniform, folded the paper away against her skin, hid her own clothes, and went and pressed a key on the laptop to check the interface. It was the organization's, which meant her abductor was theirs. She turned and went to the chimney and got her hands and feet against the brick and started up. I heard them about 4 seconds before she did, and I did not warn her, and I am going to tell you why in a moment. I had a ghost on the light fitting. I have no shame about it and never have. I would like to say that I felt something about this. I checked at the time and I did not, and I have told you so. And somewhere in the corridor outside, in the silence, she heard leather shoes. More than one pair. Rum's Porsche came up the road through the snow while she was still working out how to brace her back. He and Stout got out on opposite sides and slammed both doors and went in through the front, dialing as they walked, and nobody answered. The lobby was still full of press. 2 men in black went through a crowd of people in black suits without anybody looking up and stopped at the head of a quiet staircase. Stout held out the tracker. Boss. A locator gives you a point on a plan. The building has floors. Rum thought about the layout for a moment and started down, because he remembered there was an old cellar under the original wing, and because if Cognac had prepared a second option, that is where a body goes. Still nothing from either of them, said Stout on the stairs, then offering, could Absinthe have killed Cognac? He never did like taking orders. You told him not to touch the detective, but what if he couldn't resist? He compared privately a somewhat elderly Cognac against a young man whose methods he cannot follow and therefore finds unpredictable, and concluded that in a disagreement, Cognac dies, and that killing a long-serving colleague during an operation for personal satisfaction is precisely the failure Rum despises most. Go on, thought Stout. Go on, Absinthe. Rum glanced at him with a cigarette in his mouth and did not respond. He had said repeatedly that there was to be no hunting tonight. Absinthe knows where the line is. And more to the point, Absinthe does not kill like that. Absinthe's method is a guided process. It takes time, and it takes an audience, and it produces something with a shape to it. He would not let a target as significant as Cognac die in a corridor. There would have been a production. If that had happened, the noise in this hotel would be considerably greater than it was, which means Cognac is alive. The likelier version is that Cognac made an error, the police became interested, and Absinthe, also detained and unwilling to hand over a colleague, was still working himself free. Useless old man. The door at the bottom was locked. He stepped back and lifted his chin, and Stout shot the lock off and pushed it open. The cellar was not large. They covered it in a few paces. There was a trolley by the door with an empty cardboard box on it, and a hair on the floor beside it. Rum had already collected enough of Port's hair for one evening. He did not bend down. The laptop was still open on the table, and the room had no sign of a struggle in it, which told him Cognac had left in a hurry and had been intercepted on the way back. At least he had locked the door. Port cannot pick a lock. If she had been in this room, she was still in it. He began to walk the cellar, looking at the places a person can be. and at the fireplace he stopped. My ghosts were all over that man from the second he came through the door, and I could feel what was coming off him from 2 floors up. There was reddish-brown hair on the hearth, and if you stood still and listened past the building, there was breathing above it, suppressed and unsteady and produced by somebody working extremely hard. Rum put his hand on the pistol in his coat. Then he looked at the soot on the floor of the fireplace and thought about Port and about her particular talent for running away and had an idea he preferred. Stout called from the middle of the room, "Boss, let's try somewhere else." Said Rum out loud and turned and walked toward the door, because he would rather not climb into a filthy chimney and pull her out by the ankle like a man catching a rat. He would rather she went all the way up and came out onto the roof in the falling snow and found the organization already there. That is what an unexpected reunion is worth. Not a woman dragged out covered in soot and cobwebs. He took Stout out and up the stairs to wait on the roof. This is the part I had actually come for, and I want to be honest and say that I enjoyed every second of it. At the top of the wine rack, the mermaid launched. She was down on him from the moment he entered that cellar because he had come in already carrying more than usual, and when he stood at that fireplace it went up again, quality and quantity together, and she got both hands into it and pulled. Miss Tengu followed and carried what she tore off in the manner of a man holding the bags on a shopping trip. According to my estimate at the time, Rum was going to stay at that level for hours and would probably go higher. The mermaid worked at a speed I have rarely seen from her, and at one point she stopped to wipe the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand. My ghosts were doing my job for me while I stood 2 floors up pretending to look out of a window, and I was following all of it through them. I want you to hold on to that, because it comes back. I am aware of how I sound here. I have made my peace with it in exactly the way you would expect, which is badly. When Miss Tengu picked up the next piece, something about it felt wrong. He turned it over. There were 2 neat rows of very fine tooth marks in it. He looked at the tooth marks, then he smoothed it out, folded it against his chest, and did not say anything to anybody. The 2 men went out, and the cellar door swung on a shotlock. Inside the chimney, an adult woman let out about 1/3 of the breath she had been holding. She had been braced against the brick with all 4 limbs upside down for a length of time she could not measure. The door could not close now. She could have walked out. She did not consider it for a second. They might not have gone far. They might turn around, and then everything ends. So she made the decision to do it the hard way and go all the way to the roof in one climb and shifted her grip. And something took hold of her clothes from below. Her heart, which had just come down, went straight back up. Sweat went cold all over her back, and her mind produced, fully formed and in color, an image of Rum holding her with one hand and raising the other. And then a voice from underneath said, "Let go." Not his, a woman's, and familiar. She turned her head as far as she could and looked down, and there was somebody in a black dress and a wide black hat looking up at her. The face was calm and the features were soft, and in the dark of a chimney the details blurred, and what was left overlapped almost exactly with her sister. Let go. She let go, and was caught around the waist and set down on the hearth. On the way down she put a hand out and caught a shoulder, and when she got her feet under her there was a gray handprint on a black dress, perfectly clear. She froze. She has described the feeling as standing on an interviewer's new shoes, and then Anonymous nodded at her with something in her voice that she was not bothering to hide. "You did well." Which was true, and which I meant in a way she has never known about, because Rum's output at that fireplace had been the single best thing that happened to me all year. Rinasami looked at a small genuine smile and thought, she really does look like my sister. And then, she said I did well. So I passed. She reached out and took hold of the sleeve of that dress and said quietly, with everything she had, "Take me with you." I want to be honest and say that a question mark appeared above my head and stayed there. Then I worked it out from precedent since Watson had done exactly the same thing and concluded that she wanted to join. Why is everybody trying to get into an organization I invented to explain a puppet? I would not mind having a cook. But I do not have anything approaching the energy cores required to reach 1 puppet per member of staff, and a base and a payroll are somewhere beyond the visible horizon, and even if it were possible, spending killing intent on a building would be absurd, because there is no work. So, as Rinasami committed her future to an organization whose position and purpose she knew nothing about, the recruiter shook his head and said, "Go home," she said. And then, after a pause with real anxiety, "Did I do something wrong just now? Was she too slow up the chimney?" But she said, "I had as many questions as she did and did not show any of them, and skipped the part I did not understand and dealt with the part I could." "Don't worry about the information," I said, in a voice belonging to a woman I do not have permission to be. "Cognac won't live past tonight." Something went through her at that. At first she thought it was shock, that somebody as gentle as Anonymous could dispose of a life in 8 words. She knows perfectly well that Anonymous is not her sister, and every time the difference is demonstrated in front of her, it feels like waking up. Then she realized it was her heart and that the antidote was running out. She had picked the shortest one on purpose so that she could be small again the moment she was clear. If Rum and Stout had not spent those minutes in the cellar, she would have been on the roof by now. White vapor started coming off her. Through it, she saw Anonymous take a very large handbag out of somewhere. Half a minute later, she was kneeling on the floor of a wine cellar in clothes that no longer fitted, coming out the other side of it, and Anonymous unzipped a bag with mesh panels in the sides and held it open. "Get in, I'll see you out," Rinasami said. The two women in her head separated again, permanently. It is different. It really is different. They are both good to her, and Miss Anonymous is not her sister. She looked at the bag with a certain sadness, did not dare to complain, and climbed in. Then, from inside it, "There's a laptop on the table. It has a great deal of the organization's data on it. It also has viruses and a tracker. She could not take it. She could not give it to Dr. Tanaka or to Watson, but an organization like this would have a way." Anonymous glanced at the laptop, did not slow down, and walked past it as though it were a piece of rotten wood. Rinasami watched that through the mesh and went quiet. Of course, she thought, there is a phrase attached to these people. Anonymous knows everything. They already have it. That is why they never needed it. And the reason Xiaobai brought her the liquor is that the black organization has nothing on a temporary antidote. So there was nothing for the Anonymous to acquire, and they had to have it made. Which means there is a mole inside the black organization, at a level with access to almost everything. She lay in a handbag being carried through a corridor and thought about an organization she has feared for her entire adult life, and then about the organization that had apparently read all of it, and did not have a word for what she was feeling. Then, in a corridor, Anonymous stopped. She put the bag down and unzipped it and leaned in and handed her something, a small glass ampule with something clear moving in it. "You seem very keen to join us," she said softly. "In that case, why not start on the outside and let us see how sincere you are?" Rinasami looked at it for a while. Then she took it and nodded. Watson was halfway down the corridor when the bag arrived on his back. "Take her out of the building and then leave," said Anonymous, from above him, in a voice with nothing negotiable in it. "If you set foot in here again before dawn, you become a target as well. Children in this world are not to be assessed by ordinary standards. Watson can move Hiroshi Mizuki around a room when he is angry. A handbag was not going to trouble him, and having a teammate slows him down, which was the point. He would at least get her as far as the car." He agreed. He was lying. He got out through the crowd, found the beetle under its layer of ice, put the bag on the back seat, and unzipped it under Dr. Tanaka's questioning gaze. Then he turned around and reached for the door handle, because he had done some arithmetic. If the Anonymous were going to kill members of the black organization tonight, then getting there first and handing one to the police would be worth an enormous amount. He got the door about a third open, then his leg went cold. And then it went sharp. He turned round and Rinasami was holding an injector with an apologetic expression and an extremely steady hand, and the barrel was already empty. He got as far as you. His last coherent thought was that the needle looked very familiar, and that Xiaobai must have disguised himself as Rinasami, and that the Anonymous certainly do have a member capable of that, since one of them had recently worn an English teacher and walked off with me, and what in the world was that organization doing tonight? Then he went out. Dr. Tanaka turned round in the driver's seat slowly and found one child asleep and one child closing the door. "Let's go home," she said in an entirely level voice. "Let's not get involved in this." "Oh, right. He is very good at taking instructions. He normally takes them from Watson. Watson was unavailable, so he took them from the person who was talking. A few meters down the road, he worked out that being allowed to leave meant the danger was over and cheerfully moved on. Then he remembered the injector. Isn't that the one I developed? Liwei got it onto a television program a while back, and it's been selling extremely well as a personal safety device. The advertising was remarkably effective. My research funding has gone up a great deal." Rinasami looked at the empty casing in her hand and threw it away. "She has told me why she carried out that order. Not because of the threat, because of how it was delivered. Because when Anonymous had said that cognac would not live past tonight, she had said it the way you mentioned stepping on an insect with something warm underneath it. A person who talks like that, saying come back and I will kill you, is worth taking at face value. I had a ghost in that car with them as far as the second junction, which is how I know she did not say another word the whole way home. He has never known that I know any of this." So she pulled a cushion off the seat and got down inside a uniform 4 sizes too large and put her face against it and reviewed her evening. Taken by the black organization, rescued by the Anonymous, recruited by a third party without any clear memory of having applied. By the way, do their full members choose the placement of the mark themselves, or is it assigned? Because no ordinary person volunteers for a tattoo on the face. Miss Anonymous is clearly under the thumb of somebody appalling, and if she is promoted from the outside in, will she have to meet him? She put a hand up and touched the corner of her own eye. Then the police let us go. They could not keep 7 people any longer, and they conceded the one condition they could enforce, which is that anybody who could produce a purple handkerchief was free to leave. Cognac felt something move in him at that. He put his hand in his pocket as the officer came down the row, intending to feel around for a moment and then say he had lost it, and his fingertips found silk. He went still. Then he drew it out, slowly, and there was a purple handkerchief lying across his palm. His handkerchief was over the muzzle of a pistol when he fired, and it had gone with the shot, and he had not gone back for it. The officer glanced at it, confirmed it was a souvenir, and moved on. Cognac walked out into the corridor and did not leave. He turned around and looked back into the room at everybody in it. I watched him do the whole calculation from 4 meters away with a cup of tea in my hand, because celebrities under suspicion still shake hands. Several of those people had touched him that evening, and any of them with enough skill could have put a handkerchief in a coat pocket. And then he thought of a much better opportunity for close contact. Somebody had picked him up off a changing room floor and brushed the marks off his back to destroy the evidence with both hands at length. His eyes came up and went straight across the corridor to me, and they arrived exactly as an officer said something to me, and I reached into my own pocket and produced my own purple handkerchief and handed it over for inspection. Cognac looked away again. You are imagining things. His must have been planted by the hidden colleague, covering for him. Since the detective still has his own, the detective is not the colleague. He found that conclusion slightly deflating, and then decided it made sense. He does not know who the other member is, but the other member knows him, and there is no reason a colleague would sabotage him. Good. That means he is not one of us. Which makes him considerably easier to remove later. He snorted quietly and went. I had taken the spare that afternoon. Before the service, I had run Xiaobai and the parent's ghost past the registration desk and spent about 4 minutes being extremely charming at 2 women handing out souvenirs and had removed 1 purple handkerchief from the pile while nobody was looking. Cognac got 1. I kept 1. Planned. The reason I gave him mine at all is that Cognac could not be arrested. An arrested man goes into a cell, and the police cannot shoot a cooperative 71-year-old on the spot, and the box does not open. I followed him down. I was 11 meters behind him the whole way, walking on the balls of my feet, and I want it recorded that I had been looking forward to this for a fortnight. My mermaid was sitting on his shoulder the entire time, and she reported it to me verbatim. My whole plan rested on this, and I had no idea whether it was going to hold. He went along the corridor and down the steps and stopped when he saw the cellar door standing ajar, and stopped again, harder, when he saw the hole in the lock. That is not a picked lock. That is rum. Although it might not be. Port could have acquired a companion in the last year, somebody with a firearm and no patience, and that hole might be a rescue. The first possibility is survivable, the second is not. He drew his pistol, worked the slide, and pushed the door with his shoulder. He got 2 steps, and the door behind him opened again, and rum was standing in it, and there was a silenced muzzle against Cognac's forehead. The cold coming off the man was not metaphorical. There was still unmelted snow on his shoulders and along the brim of his hat, and the coat was wet through in patches because he had spent a very long time on a roof. Why, said Rum pleasantly, did you not kill that reporter immediately and destroy the film? Cognac said, Reporter? Film? What are you talking about? Rum thought about a rooftop, and about the snow, and about the prey he had been 11 meters from and had chosen to let climb, and about the email from the boss that had arrived while he stood there. His smile widened. Haven't you heard? Tomorrow's front page is a photograph of you aiming a pistol at the ceiling at Director Hoshino's memorial. Cognac's face came apart. The flash. The flash in front of the chandelier that the host had explained away and that he had chosen to accept. He understood the entire evening in about a second and a half and went cold all over, but he did not want to die, so he spread his hands and produced the warmest expression available to a man with a gun on his forehead. Don't. I have never been loyal to that identity. If I am exposed, I can abandon it entirely and come in properly, underground. And if you kill me, you will never find Port, because I know who took her. Give me a chance to make it good and I will bring her in tonight. He knew, saying it, that with a photograph like that and an age like his, he was probably finished either way. So it was not a bargain, it was a delay. If Rum agreed not to do it in this room, there would be movement, and movement produces confusion, and confusion produces an exit. He hesitated over whether to say that Port was small now. Against saying it, Cognac does not know Rum well and has only rumors, and the rumors say a man who works constantly, and a man who works constantly presumably cares about credit. If Rum wanted the credit for that discovery, he could take the information and then pull the trigger and own it himself. Against not saying it, without knowing she is a child, the organization's search would be hopeless, and Rum might simply think anything you can do I can do and shoot him for arrogance. He was still weighing it when he caught movement at the edge of the doorway. Somebody was looking in. He got a sliver of profile, leeway, and a lifeline arrived. More people means more noise, and from Rum's own email, from the word provoke, this is somebody Rum himself considers a problem. He did not have time to build anything. He took the only card he had and threw it. He pointed at the door. It was him. He's the one who took port. He knew it was untrue. I have been in his field of view since the day she vanished, and I have never gone near her. But it puts a detective in Rum's line of sight, and a detective who has now also seen Rum holding a gun on a colleague, and both of those things move the order of business so that the man admitting his own mistakes with a good attitude comes second. Rum did not turn around. Cognac was still armed, and the oldest trick in the room is to make the other man look away, and then Stout behind him said in genuine surprise, "What? You? So there is somebody there." Rum took the pistol off Cognac, disarmed him properly, and turned. I was leaning on the doorframe. "You really do hold a grudge," I said, and looked at Cognac with what I hope was reproach. "All I did was fail to see an attack coming and throw you on the floor by accident, and since then we have both been sitting in a room with the police. You know better than anybody that I have not had time to do anything else. And now you use it to frame me. Have you realized you're going to die and decided to invent something that will get you out of the room?" I had heard the word port from the corridor and had felt a very large pot descending toward my head. I had also had a worse thought, which is that without Watson and Rinasami in the building, the atmospheric pressure was wrong and Rum might not be decisive. If he took the delay, if he believed any of it, that could not be allowed. So I stirred it. Cognac was delighted to see me walk in of my own accord. He assumed he had acquired another hot-headed young man too proud to run, coming forward to confront evil with justice and a raised chin. And then he listened to the sentence, and something in it was wrong. I had described rescuing Port as being framed, which means that to me, saving a person is not a good thing. That is not how a high school detective thinks, and why had neither of them shot me? Even if they needed Port's location out of me first, they should have had me on the floor. He felt the muzzle still against his forehead, and looked at my face, and something enormous and cold arrived. The word colleague came back to him. He stared at me, and said hoarsely, "You're—" "That's right," I said over the top of him. "I'm the one who gave you the purple handkerchief. That's how you got out of the interview room." Which is not what he was about to say, which is why I said it. "What?" He came off the floor an inch, genuinely outraged, because a man who has been beaten for 4 minutes and then rescued by his beater has been given more than he can process. "Then why did you hit me?" Bang. Rum pulled the trigger without any expression at all. He has since explained his reasoning in the car, and it was this. Photographed in the act. Additional errors on top of it, needed a junior to smuggle him out of police custody, and then, rather than addressing any of that, produced false intelligence in order to escape in the confusion. A parasite. Every additional second is an insult to the organization. Cognac went down and did not move. The killing intent aimed at me came off him instantly, and Counselor Nakamura's shikigami came off his leg and hit the floor and was pounced on by a mermaid who had been waiting for it with visible impatience. I did not look at either of them. I was watching the body, and something did come up out of it. Pale, thin as paper. It hesitated. It drifted toward Rum. It got closer, and it began to shake, and it kept going, and it put out something like a hand and touched his calf, and went straight back down, considerably faster than it had come, and put its arms around its own corpse and held on like something that had come home. I stood there. It is a shikigami, a slightly braver shikigami than most shikigami, and still a shikigami. The difference matters. A shikigami has almost no mind left. It has an instinct, and the instinct is hatred of the person who made it, and to detach one cleanly, the killer has to be punished, and that is the whole of it. A ghost fetus keeps a great deal of the person, which means a ghost fetus can be talked to, reasoned with, frightened, lied to, bribed. It is not a dignified branch of the profession, and I am good at it. I had spent a week planning for this. If Cognac produced a ghost fetus, I was going to put on somebody else's face, put a bag over Rum's head, stage a convincing beating, and abduct it with a combination of pressure and sympathy. I had the face picked out. Tequila dropped nothing, and now Cognac has dropped nothing. Is the rate on codenames genuinely that poor? I had assumed a codename meant something. This organization is worthless. I stood in a wine cellar with a dead man at my feet and thought that, in as villainous a voice as I could manage internally, and wanted very much to crack my knuckles to fit the moment, and could not, because there were other people present and a grown man does not do that. Then I looked over at Rum, whose killing intent had not come down at all, and it was magnificent. And I remembered that Champagne is out there somewhere, and that Haruka Tanaka came out of this organization too. I withdrew the statement. The organization has a stable supply and provides targets from time to time. It is fine. Stout was breaking bottles by then, specifically the very high-proof ones, and spreading it. I stood in the middle of it and idly rubbed a piece of killing intent that had floated to my elbow and was about to hurry the ghosts along when a shape moved in front of me. Rum had turned halfway round and the pistol was on me. I let go of what I was holding and produced confusion. You've been in a room with police all evening and your phone was taken. You cannot have seen that photograph. His finger was on the trigger and his other hand was turning over a box of matches. So how do you know Cognac is not going to live? Because I had been looking forward to it for a fortnight and had stopped thinking of it as a prediction. Beside us, the sound of breaking glass stopped, and Stout glanced over with an expression of profound hope. I heard you in the corridor, I said. Rum looked at me, then he checked it, because that is what he does. He had looked both ways before entering, out of habit, and the corridor had been empty. He had mentioned the reporter only after coming in. To have heard it, I would have had to sprint, and there had been no footsteps. But the hall upstairs is one wall away, and it is extremely loud, and a person moving quietly would be covered by it, and, he has noted this before. I moved quietly, and there was a second piece of evidence. Rum does not explain himself to people he is removing. It wastes time. He tells them nothing and finishes. He had talked tonight only because he had spent half a day in the wind on a roof and had let go of something he had been hunting for a year and had needed something enjoyable and had wanted to watch a man go from composed to terrified, which meant that if I had not actually overheard it, I would have produced a safer lie. I would have said I heard it from a police officer I get on with after Cognac left the room. The fact that I had used the version that could be checked was, to him, proof that it was true. He lowered the gun. He also thought, without much interest, that even if I had done it, it hardly mattered. Cognac had been worse than he thought. A more careful man would have dealt with the reporter and would have had a handkerchief and would have survived being tripped. Incompetence in the end. A man living off the organization's money and contacts for decades, climbing that ladder and contributing nothing, and reportedly using the last of it to buy his children a reputation. And thinking about the night's other operations and the speed with which the boss had ordered this one closed, the most important task of the evening given to an old man while younger cadres cleaned up minor targets. Rum nodded to himself and stopped speculating. He waved us out, then he lit a match and dropped it in. It went up like something taking a breath. 3 men in black left the building through a side door of the old wing that had not been used in years, while the police and the staff were still getting people out of the front. On the way, Stout looked at me and then at Rum and had a question mark the size of the building over his head because his brother had accepted it. There is no evidence. There is never any evidence. And Cognac's death is, he feels, connected to Absinthe in a way that will never be provable. Port had got away as well. Boss, he said, unwilling to let it go. About the hostage plan. Rum took a moment to remember what that was. And every time he thinks about Port now, something comes up in him that he does not entirely control. Idiot, he said. She is a long way away by now. What do you propose? A live broadcast? Stout stopped. Because in a live broadcast or in anybody's photograph, the visible criminals holding the hostage would be himself and his boss. Exactly like Cognac. He shut his mouth and pretended he had not spoken. I looked at the killing intent rolling off Rum like weather, checked that nobody was watching, and reached over and took a handful. Then I looked at Stout, who had caused it. Our eyes met. He went rigid. He took 2 steps with his arm and leg on the same side moving together, hopped once to correct it, and looked at the pavement. I thought, I do not know what that hostage plan was, but I am fairly sure that man does not wish me well. Since it had been rejected, it did not matter. I threw a few ghosts at Rum and told them to work. We got into the car because I did not want to be standing on a pavement talking to Rum. I did that arithmetic on the pavement with my hand already on the door handle. There were still reporters in that district. Their attention was on a burning hotel, but a bored one might wander 2 streets over and photograph a boy and a man in black out of habit, and that photograph might reach a 6-year-old who was, at that moment, being driven home unconscious, which could be a small problem or an enormous one. Watson might realize the truth, or he might construct something charitable about a stranger asking directions, or he might conclude that the organization had begun recruiting promising young detectives. Given that it can be avoided for nothing, avoid it. The window went up. Rum drove for a while and then said something that appeared to have nothing to do with anything. Champagne is extremely good at disguise and impersonation, extremely good at reading people, and ideally suited to infiltration. She is irreplaceable on certain kinds of work. He changed gear. None of that is why her partners keep dying, and she is never called to account. I did not say anything. A considerable number of members have died through her decisions. As long as she makes no large mistakes, the boss will not touch her, because she is somebody the boss is watching. Then, in the mirror, so the fact that she can do a thing does not mean that you can. And then, with the temperature gone, do not try anything like tonight again. This is the one exception. I looked out of the window and did the arithmetic while he was talking. There is no evidence that I arranged Cognac's death. There is no evidence because I did not. But in Rum's model of me, a person who can turn any unrelated detail into a weapon could not possibly have failed to notice a camera flash going off in a dark room at the exact moment a colleague fired. Which means that even in the version where I did nothing, I stood and watched and let it happen and moved it forward by staying still. And the handkerchief. To him, the handkerchief was not a rescue at all. It was a delivery. It got Cognac out of police custody and into the hands of the organization, on schedule, so that I could be present when he was removed, the same way I am present at every other murder I am supposed to have designed. Which means I did not write the whole script, but I got to stand in the room while it played, and Cognac, being both a cadre and a man of standing, was a far better subject than the ordinary material, so even a rough production would have been extremely satisfying, and that I had done it on the first opportunity, without hesitation, and had chosen to stand still and watch. He had decided, on the drive over, that if he let this pass simply because the dead man was Cognac, then next time would be larger. And that in the extreme case, a valuable asset becomes something that hunts its own colleagues for entertainment. The wrong turnings are everywhere. Even a genius has to be pruned. A good seedling matters, and so does the person holding the shears. And he had opened with champagne on purpose because he had heard that she had put a hand on me recently and had come off worse, and he suspected the experience had given me the impression that harming members of this organization is normal and carries no consequence. That had to be corrected immediately. And usefully, it would also make me more careful around her. He watched me be visibly thoughtful in the mirror, and was satisfied. We came back into Baca, and he pulled over. Behind us, if you looked at the sky rather than the street, the hotel was making a long orange smear across the low cloud, and he glanced at it in the mirror and said, mostly to himself, a simple and spectacular way to go. In a sense it suits him. And then he stopped talking. Because a designed and glamorous death, which suits the subject exactly, is a phrase he has written in the margin of nearly every one of my case reports for a year. He looked at that thought for several seconds. Then he told me to get out, and drove off to inspect the other half of the evening's work. I went home. I signed Counselor Nakamura's shikigami at the kitchen table. Then I took the knight's killing intent out of the mermaid's arms, which took some negotiation. Then I turned the lights off and got into bed and could not sleep. So I sat up and got all of them out and put them in a line on the quilt and counted them. It took a while. There are considerably more than 4 now. I counted them twice, the way I have counted them since the first night there were 5, and somewhere in the second pass the disappointment about Cognac stopped mattering, and I fell asleep with the light on. I got the rest of that night from 3 people, none of whom knew they were giving it to me, and I have assembled it in the order it happened. She gave me this part herself, and she gave it to me smiling. My ghosts told me first, the way they always do, and I pretended for another minute that I had not heard them. Watson slept until dawn because he had been given a full ampule of something Dr. Tanaka designed. Agasa had told Rand that he was busy with a new invention and did not want to come home, which is an excuse Watson uses so often that nobody questioned it. He woke at 5, shook both of them awake in a manner he later apologized for, and telephoned Matsumoto as Ren Yamamoto, and learned that a man named Takeshi Yamada, who had been holding a purple handkerchief, had died in a fire in the old wine cellar, and that the fire had taken the room with him, and that the police had recovered very little. Purple handkerchief, wine cellar. He did not need the morning news to know who that had been. Did the anonymous really do it? He walked up and down a living room and thought about a woman in black who has saved a great many detectives, and about a small boy who has put a needle in him more times than he can count, and about a phrase delivered in a corridor, and the back of his neck went cold. Because whatever else that woman is, and she is strange, and she is marked, and her methods are alarming, Watson has never quite been able to believe she would actually kill anybody. He sat down and revised his file on us. Then he found the other thing. Did Yamada produce a handkerchief when the police asked? Matsumoto had to go and check because he had spent that part of the evening trying and failing to stop 2 men in black at a hotel entrance and had then had a fire. He rang back with a yes, and Watson had by then seen the morning news, which carried a photograph of Takeshi Yamada pointing a pistol at a chandelier with a purple handkerchief over the muzzle, which had gone with the shot, which had landed on Watson's own head in the dark, so Yamada could not have produced it, which means somebody gave him one. 6 faces went through his head. Then somebody knocked twice on Dr. Tanaka's door and pushed it open. It was me, coming for a cat that my underlings had left in the professor's garage. Watson turned around and nodded, out of habit. and then went completely still. I came in and did not see a cat. I saw a small boy standing in the middle of a living room holding a telephone in one hand and a bow tie in the other, who looked at me for slightly too long and then went into another room in a manner that was not casual. I did not have to ask. Xiaobai went and sat on the receiver. The report came back inside a minute. Watson was asking Inspector Matsumoto about the purple handkerchiefs, and with some hesitation, whether Li Wei had produced one last night. My instincts are excellent. I waved the ghost off to keep listening, caught a cat that had got out of its box and was making for the front door, picked it up and sat down on the sofa to wait for breakfast. Matsumoto told him yes. Watson let out a breath he had been holding for 11 minutes and closed the question. He was not, he told himself, actually suspicious. He had simply been eliminating, and a detective eliminates everybody equally before he finds the truth. That is basic practice. He nodded to himself, satisfied, and covered over the fact that it had not been a process of elimination at all. It had been an instinct, arriving all at once, about somebody he sees every day. He then began working through the two guests who had genuinely lost their handkerchiefs and the ones who had left early and might have handed theirs over on the way out. Rinasami put her head round the kitchen door, established that I was upright and had no visible damage and no dark circles, and went back to the stove considerably relieved. So the counselor's death had nothing to do with me after all. Cognac is dead and nothing has happened to Li Wei, although the jobs he is given and the people he knows and the amount of information he seems to have do not look like a peripheral members. She got a chill down her back and then looked through the gap in the door at a man on a sofa with a cat on him, and her face softened. She is overthinking it. Cadres do not spend their afternoons finding cats. And Dr. Tanaka had mentioned that the invitation to the memorial had come from a client who visits my office regularly, which makes my presence there entirely ordinary, a coincidence at most. As for the intelligence, he works it out. He is very good at that. She decided to stop because she had learned something the previous night, which is that even if she found out something true about me, there is nothing she could do with it except worry, and worrying at me creates problems. Fortunately, she is no longer only a scientist hiding in a basement with an antidote. She has passed a test that Yamamoto failed. She is provisionally in. She thought about the way Miss Anonymous had moved in that cellar, and since nobody was in the kitchen, made a fist. They can give her what she wants. On the sofa, I sneezed. I checked myself over and found no cold, and then looked down at the extremely long cat lying across my arm. Are you molting? The cat looked at me, yawned with its whole face, and went limp in the manner of an animal that has no further comment and would like to be taken home. Lazy, and it still runs away every week. It is not easy being a cat. I patted its head sympathetically. The detective boys arrived after breakfast to collect Watson for school and to remind Dr. Tanaka about a film. He had promised them one. They had solved a riddle on a postcard for him some weeks earlier and had reunited him with a woman he had not seen in 40 years, and he had promised them a monster film, and he had entirely forgotten, and he was leaving for Kyushu that afternoon. 3 faces began to collapse. Why don't I take them? I said, from the sofa. I'm free at the moment. 3 heads turned in unison. I have never seen color leave children that fast. Because although Watson and Rinasami have both assured them, repeatedly, that Li Wei does not hit children, those 3 are not stupid, and they have noticed that when the subject comes up, both of their reassurers look somewhere else and their voices go up slightly, which means neither of them is certain either, and these 3 have personally watched me work on a great many people. Agasa, however, had forgotten all of it, and his face lit up. Excellent, and you're much closer to their age than I am. You'll have far more to talk about. 3 small hands went up, trembling, in an attempt to lodge an objection. No. Isn't it a good idea? I said, getting up and coming over, in a friendly voice. If you avoid me, I'll be very upset. They stopped. I watched 3 children construct an equation. Upset equals unhappy equals, and a sequence of images arrived, which I have since had described to me in detail: a baton in motion, a librarian's scream carrying up 4 floors of an empty building at night, a psychiatrist with a gun being kicked along a wet street, a burglar making a noise in an old villa in the mountains. Hold on, that last one was not actually him, but that is not the point. The point is that even with a clear conscience, judging by the way adults describe them, they are not the kind of well-behaved children who can rely on the goodwill of a large young man on a dark road. Koji broke first, being the one most thoroughly educated in adult society. Of course not, he said, with a smile that had nothing behind it. I love going to films with Li Wei. Ha ha ha. Yua and Ryota nodded like birds at feed. I put a hand on each of their heads in turn. Then it settled. I'll come for you after school, Watson said. He could not decide, he has told me, whether to sympathize with the man being refused by 3 children or with the 3 children who had just agreed to something under duress. Then he softened it. Li Wei is very fond of children, even if the children have not caught up yet. Spend enough time with him and they will realize he is a good person who would never hit a child. Probably, as long as they do not break the law. My actual reasoning is that the detective boys attract homicide at a rate that outperforms every other asset I own, including Watson, and that a group of 4 unsupervised children in a public building on a weekday evening is the single most productive environment available to me in this city. I had a map with every cinema within 4 kilometers marked on it so that whichever of them had the strongest instincts could choose, and I intended to feed them first because a remarkable number of murders happen in restaurants. I finished at the office at 4, closed up and rode to Titan Elementary School and parked opposite the gate and leaned on the bike and looked at the building. In Class B, Watson had his bag on and was standing up when 3 pairs of hands put him back into his chair. Don't go. We got our cleaning duty swapped to today specially. We agreed to stand him up together. Watson said, you are afraid he will get angry and hit you, and your plan is to stand him up. Do you understand what you're doing? Cleaning duty is an unavoidable event, said Koji, who has thought about this. As long as we don't mention that we swapped, he'll never know. And if we can get out of today, we can push the film back until the professor is free, and then he doesn't have to take us at all. Rinasami looked at her watch, yawned, and said, well, good luck. I'm going home. 3 heads turned. They very nearly put their hands on her and then did not, because although they are extremely fond of her, they are also slightly afraid of her, and the hands came back and pressed Watson down instead, since he had been attempting to leave in the confusion. She walked out of the gate, looked around, found me across the road, adjusted her cap, and jogged over. I looked past her at an empty gate. Why is it only you? She hesitated for about half a second between loyalty to a group of 7-year-olds and loyalty to me. They don't want to go to the cinema, she said. So they swapped their cleaning duty to today. A pause. You should go home. She has told me she said it because being stood up is one thing, but standing in the road waiting for it is another. I did not get angry. I said, I see, you go on home. She tilted her head slightly, dissatisfied with the answer, and looked at me still leaning against a motorcycle with no intention of moving. Then she decided not to push it, picked up her bag, and went. Watson rang 11 minutes later, having been elected. Hello? We got in trouble today and we've been kept back to clean. Maybe we should leave it? He had embellished it on purpose because if it had genuinely been scheduled duty, they would have used it that morning to decline, and a last-minute punishment is the only version that survives inspection. A competent detective, he has told himself, is meticulous even when lying. That's all right, I said cheerfully. I'll wait. 3 children listening at his ear said. He tried for another minute and gave up. Then he looked at the 3 of them crouched in the corner drawing circles on the floor with their fingers and said, just go. It's a film. Sit still and go home afterwards. Koji looked at Ryota and did not answer because he is confident about his own cinema manners and considerably less confident about the others, and I appear to regard them as a single unit. Then he brightened. In that case, after cleaning, we hide in the grounds. If we stay hidden until it's too late for children to be out, he can't take us at all. Yes, said Yua and Ryota and slapped their palms together. Watson said, fine, whatever makes you happy. He went to fetch the mops, and on the way past a window that faces the gate, he glanced out, across an empty schoolyard, at somebody standing on the far side of the road, and felt something complicated. Because there was a period before he knew me when he had heard that I associated with delinquents and had constructed a very clear picture of what that meant. A man blocking a school gate with a baseball bat and a bicycle lock, and an accident, and then a stage scene, and then a 3-choice problem laid on the desk of Yamamoto the detective. He had never once seen me at a school gate in 3 years of secondary school. He had now seen it once, at a primary school. Why does he want so badly to spend an evening with 3 badly behaved children? He carried the mops back, deep in thought. Out on the road, I was answering emails, clients, a photograph of somebody's cat, filed for later, several messages to people whose names I recognized, sent for no reason other than to be in front of them, so that when something goes wrong in their lives, they think of a detective and the detective has a face. One of my underlings was going away with his family, so I redrew the cat-finding territories for the fortnight. I sent that, and looked up, and a car went past. It went about 6 meters, stopped, and reversed. A white Mazda came back level with me, and the window went down. What are you doing standing here? Kenji Satomi looked at me, then across at the primary school, and then back, and did it twice more, entirely unable to establish a relationship between the 2 objects, and I looked at my employer, and my expression was, briefly, worse than his, because he was wearing an enormous, brilliantly clear, killing intent, and Kenji Satomi produces almost none, and what he does produce evaporates before I can reach it. Then the window came the rest of the way down, and the air moved. Apples. My ghosts had it before I did. The mermaid stared at Kenji Satomi. Then she looked down at the thing in her arms, which is a fragment of Champagne's killing intent that I gave her after a considerable amount of begging and one act of open rebellion, and which she carries everywhere like a toy. She looked at Kenji Satomi again, then at the fragment, then at Kenji Satomi. I breathed in a very high grade of apple and looked at my boss's face and thought about it. I have proof. I could reach through that window and take the edge of that face off, and I would have a member of the black organization identified in a public street, and then I did not. Because the FBI are watching Champagne's real identity. If she is unmasked on a pavement in front of somebody's camera, then to the people watching her, the boy standing next to her is an associate, and I acquire an entirely new category of problem. Whereas as long as the face holds, I am a member of the public who was approached by a woman he did not recognize. Also, Champagne is not a person who volunteers for danger. Without the disguise, she would leave immediately to get out of the open, or she would leave because whatever she had come for could no longer be done, and she was here, which meant she wanted something. So rather than ending a meeting on the instant, I would prefer to take everything off her that I can carry and use the fact that I have apparently failed to see through her as an argument for her doing this again, which meant I had to treat Kenji Satomi exactly as I treat Kenji Satomi, except avoiding every subject connected to the police, and with slightly less warmth than usual. There are so many false names in my life now. There is so much to hold. Thank goodness Port went home when she was told. Obedient children live longer. Also, what are the FBI actually doing? Is anybody watching this woman at all? I promised my neighbor I'd take some of his children to a film, I said. He looked at his watch and at an empty school. School's finished. They're on cleaning duty. They'll be a while. I see, said Kenji Satomi thoughtfully and asked nothing else, and drove away. I watched the car go and was mildly thrown. All of that, the face, the car, the stop, the reverse, a conversation of 4 lines, and then leaving. Was it not aimed at me at all, or at the boy inside the school, or at something else entirely? I got my phone out and could not decide between warning the real Kenji Satomi immediately and following the car to see where it went. And while I was standing there deciding, I heard tires. Kenji Satomi came back with a large paper bag of hot burritos. He opened the passenger door from the inside and gestured at the seat with the bag. Get in and eat something. Children playing at cleaning have no sense of time. You'll be here a while, I said. I suspect that even without the killing intent, even without the apples, I would have known. The real one is not that free. If I have the schedule right, he was 3 prefectures away delivering parcels. I looked at the face doing Kenji Satomi's polite, immovable smile, and underneath it there was something extremely pleased and faintly expectant. Then I understood. She had asked me what I was doing, and I had told her, and she had gone away and come back with dinner. She wants to come to the film. She wants to sit in a row of seats with her godson and watch a monster. I got in. The bag on the armrest was steaming and smelled genuinely excellent. And then my brain connected the words champagne and food and produced a hotel bedroom and a woman with a towel and everything after that, and I stopped moving. She read the pause as suspicion. Scotch offers absinthe food, and absinthe will not touch it, she thought. So this is how the two of them get on. Interesting. She prepared with some satisfaction to say, "What, do you think it's poisoned?" And before she could, I reached over, opened the bag, looked in for a moment, selected the best-looking one, and unwrapped it. I did check. Obviously, I checked. She had driven off too fast for the mermaid to get clear, so the mermaid went with her and reported that she bought biscuits and food and put nothing in either, and there was no killing intent aimed at me at all. There had been a trace of one at the start, and the parent's ghost had identified her by the smell of it inside a second and a half and had latched onto my legs the moment the window came down, and by the time I had finished being confused about a killing intent whose taste did not match its owner, there was none left. The biscuits were good. Champagne is a strange woman with excellent judgment about food. I memorized the shop's name off the paper bag. I will be taking my underlings there. I ate with one eye on the school gate, in case any of the detective boys attempted an escape, and ignored the look I was getting from the driver's seat. She sat there with mixed feelings and thought about her deduction that Absinthe is wary of cadres and about the fact that he had just eaten, and since she was wearing somebody else's face and could say anything she liked, she said sarcastically, "Aren't you worried there's poison in the pie?" Inside the car, I was defrauding a colleague of a free dinner. Inside the school, 4 children were mopping a classroom without enthusiasm. The wraps went. Then a box of miso soup, which was also very good, and which I drank while looking out of the window at the gate. She watched me finish it and thought privately, I should have put something in the soup. Let him experience society properly. Then, never mind. I can wear a face anytime. Perhaps rum next. No. That makes it easier for Daiki Ito to find me. I gathered up the packaging, and she folded her arms and looked around and finally registered something. "The gates are shut," she said, in Kenji Satomi's voice, with a distinct edge of enjoyment. "Why haven't your children come out? Perhaps tomorrow's headline is going to be innocent children trapped on school premises meet terrible fate. I looked at her. Are you free today? Kenji Satomi's face did something very small, because if she has it right, Scotch does not know that Absinthe has a codename, and a peripheral member does not talk to a superior like that. Will Scotch not retaliate, or has Absinthe recognized her? She rubbed her chin and looked at me with a question in it. And I had already gone back to watching the gate because a shape had moved behind a ground floor window. I was watching a school gate at the time, and I did not look at her once, which was the entire point. I got this from a very tired professor who did not realize he was giving it to me, which made her doubt herself, because a man who is seen through a disguise does not then lose interest. So this must simply be how Scotch and Absinthe speak to each other, and on reflection she thought, the odds of Absinthe penetrating this are low. Absinthe works at Scotch's agency, and Scotch is almost never in it, which means the two of them barely know each other. And Scotch is a man who cultivates an air of mystery and behaves unpredictably, so turning up at a primary school to wait for children is not even out of character. And as for the tone, Scotch is a pragmatist. He values Absinthe as an intelligence asset with a great deal of growth in him and does not care about manners. Absinthe has worked that out and has simply stopped performing for a temporary superior, and both parties are getting what they want. And on that subject, Scotch, knowing exactly what he has not recommended Absinthe to the organization. He has kept him working for nothing. Champagne herself does not think full membership is a gift, but if she is going to criticize a colleague, then she will say that Scotch is building a private power base and is possibly also worried that a subordinate who rises too fast becomes unmanageable or a threat, selfish, and cunning. She resolved to invite him onto something dangerous at the earliest opportunity, and then the passenger door opened. "Where are you going?" I got out. I had been intending to abandon her because while I was eating a burrito, every scrap of killing intent she had brought with her had been harvested, but somewhere in the last 90 seconds she had produced a fresh one, of an entirely new grade. So I said honestly, to see what's keeping them, and shut the door and went along the wall rather than to the gate and found a quiet stretch and got a hand on the top and went over. If nothing is wrong, I will collect 3 children and take them out to dinner and a monster film. If something is wrong, I will deal with whoever is causing it and then collect 3 children and take them out to dinner and a monster film. I landed in a flower bed on the far side, and behind me, another hand came over the top of the wall. Kenji Satomi came over that wall like a gymnast and landed beside me, straightened his jacket, looked around at the climbing frame and the swings and the school building 40 meters away, and asked with enormous interest, "Which way?" I started toward the nearest door. She came after me, and her face was perfectly composed, and her footsteps were slightly light in the manner of a parent on a school outing. I caught her reflection in a ground floor window as we passed it. She is destroying my employer's reputation, which raises a question I have been meaning to look into. If Kenji Satomi ever finds out that Champagne has been walking around Tokyo wearing his face, is that a man who produces killing intent? Because the risk to him is genuine. Consider how often that man communicates with his subordinates, and consider the average intelligence of those subordinates, and then consider a day on which one of them jogs up to Kenji Satomi in the street to say hello or to ask for instructions on an operation. The organization would lose another bottle. I should warn him, not immediately. First, I intend to take everything off her that she has. She caught me looking at her reflection and smiled at me with somebody else's mouth, and we walked across an empty schoolyard together in the dark, and behind us, on the far side of the wall, the city went on producing what I need at exactly the rate it always has.